campus recreation center.
Good evening, and welcome to the Statesman's Election Night Live coverage. I'm Maya Brown.
Good evening, and I'm Melissa Azafepa. Thank you for joining us tonight. We've been working very hard to bring you the most accurate information while the nation waits for the results of this extremely important presidential election. But we'd like to start the night off by thanking SBU TV, our volunteers, our editorial board, and Phil Altier for helping us put this show together tonight.
Later on, we'll have a live panel with various cultural organizations, an interview with Professor Helmut Norpoth, who accurately predicted the results of the 2016 presidential election, and much, much more.
Stay tuned for that and more later on tonight. We'll be on till midnight to keep you updated on the latest news. Also, feel free to send in questions by commenting on any of our platforms during our live coverage. So let's start with some news. According to the Associated Press, Trump has already won Kentucky and West Virginia, and Biden has won Vermont and Virginia. And in Nevada, the Trump campaign just filed a lawsuit to keep the polls open in Clark County after earlier technical problems.
Now, people have voted in record numbers this year, which is great news. For many college students, this is their first year voting in a presidential election, and their experience voting during a pandemic is sure to be a memorable one. Reporter Gabby Pardo has the story.
It was 5:45 in the morning when students began lining up to cast their votes at 6 a.m. in the 2020 election at Stony Brook University. This year, voting is taking place at the campus recreation center rather than the usual student activity center. Students were required to wear masks when entering the recreation center, in addition to remaining 6 feet apart. Faculty members were ecstatic to see students showing up this early.
Our students are very spirited. This is a very exciting election to be a part of. And I think our Civic Justice folks did an amazing job at getting out the word and getting folks registered to vote and encourage folks to come on down. So I'm not surprised at all. It's a beautiful morning here at Stony Brook, New York. So come on down and let your voice be heard.
All polls in New York State opened at 6 a.m. as well, and closed tonight at 9 p.m. Some students felt the personal need to come early, merely to get their civic duty over with, and guarantee that their vote is heard.
We woke up around 5 a.m. this morning and got dressed, put on warm clothes, figured we'd have to stand outside. Thankfully, we did not have to stand outside for very long, and they had a lot of us in the gym socially distanced. So that was nice of them. And we were excited to vote. We need our voice to be heard, and that's why we got up this early.
Students, in addition to Stony Brook athletes, volunteered their time today to congratulate students on voting in this historic election. They encouraged students to continue voting in future elections while also handing out free items like t-shirts and cup koozies. Other colleges all across the country are encouraging students to vote. This initiative has turned into a competition to see which college can get the most students to fill out their ballots this election year.
We're also encouraging them to pledge to vote because we're in a national competition with all other colleges and universities. Right now we're number 5, so we're trying to win. And it takes 30 seconds. You just scan the QR code and get that pledge. So we're really excited. Hopefully we can come home with a win.
Many students felt that it was especially important to vote in this crucial election.
Obviously, we want to make a difference in the world, and it's very important to vote to get our voices heard. And I feel like as young adults, we should be doing this anyway. So I think it's a good idea to come out and vote today.
The reason why I came out to vote today is because it is in my right as an American to vote and have my voice be heard. My family came here in 1997 from Vietnam, and it is something that my family has been chasing after, to have our own right to vote. And so I am honoring that today.
I'm standing outside here of the Stony Brook University Recreation Center, where students of all years are coming today to do one thing: their civic duty to vote. Right now, students are coming outside the back entrance to be congratulated by student volunteers with stickers saying that students voted today, in addition to cookies as well. For the Statesman, I'm Gabby Pardo. Back to you guys.
Thanks, Gabby. At this point, over half of the US has closed their polling sites. While there might be people still in line to get their last-minute vote in, polling places are wrapping things up. New York polls will close in less than an hour at 9 p.m., including our polling station on campus.
So now, let's take a look back at the election data from 2016 to see how Suffolk County voted back then. Politico reported that in 2016, 52% of Suffolk County residents voted for President Trump and 44% for Hillary Clinton.
In the Division 1 congressional election, incumbent Lee Zeldin is seeking his fourth two-year term in the House of Representatives. Ballotpedia reported that Zeldin beat Democratic opponent Anna Throne Holst with 58% of the vote back in 2016.
So as of now, Trump has won Oklahoma, Alabama, Mississippi, South Carolina, and Tennessee.
And Biden has won Illinois, Maryland, Rhode Island, Delaware, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. Now, Twitter plays a big role in how politicians, media outlets, and advocacy organizations engage with voters. Since tonight is election night, Twitter is sure to be on fire right now.
Oh yeah.
Reporter Alec Lewis has a scoop on what people are talking about on there. Alec, how's it going tonight?
Good evening. I'm Statesman News Editor Alec Lewis here for a social media update on the 2020 election candidates. Both presidential election candidates have the same message when it comes to engaging their voters on social media, and that message being that this will be the most important election of their lifetime. So both general election candidates are using that narrative to encourage people to vote and to push them to the polls. And that's especially true on social media, most notably on Trump's Twitter, is that his campaign account, named the Trump War Room, has been retweeting pictures of minority voters and women voters in Trump campaign merchandise. Trump has also been retweeting and posting videos of him making arguments of why people should vote for him. Trump has also tweeted in all caps, "We are looking really good all over the country. Thank you," at around 6:15, so that's around 2 hours ago. Trump's War Room has also tweeted that Donald Trump has won West Virginia and Kentucky, as you guys said before. I also just want to take this time to remind everybody that it's important to note that both Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram are flagging tweets and posts of election candidates, even presidential candidates, inaccurate if they claim victory before they get a reputable source to verify the victory. Trump has also posted a video of what is captioned as a parade of people in Nigeria carrying Trump signs and chanting his name. The vice president, Mike Pence, he has not tweeted yet today from his official government account, Twitter account that is. And one of the more funnier and lighthearted posts of the day from the Trump campaign is actually a video montage of President Trump dancing to YMCA by the Village People, and doing a dance on the stage of his campaign rallies. It's a funny little montage. So the most recent development for social media on the Biden camp, and that is tonight, is the phrase being retweeted is, quote, "stay in line," and that's being tweeted by Dr. Jill Biden. That's Joe Biden's wife, Kamala Harris, and is being retweeted by a bunch of Democrats as well. Harris tonight tweeted about 3 hours ago a quote, "Thinking about these words today by the great John Lewis," and Representative John Lewis, he was a civil rights advocate, and he passed just earlier this year. And she says, quote, "Democracy is not a state, it is an act." And she says, "Don't miss this final day to participate in our democratic process, because your voice is your vote." She is also encouraging Californians to vote over the past few hours, and she represents them in the Senate. Thank you very much. Back to you guys.
Rabia Gursoy has put together a panel featuring students on Stony Brook campus from multicultural organizations. We'll come back to that, but we're going to say thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yes, and in terms of election updates, Biden has also won New Jersey.
So the New York polling stations will be closing shortly, but results might not be immediately available. People waiting in lines will still have the chance to cast their ballot after closing time. I'd also just like to point out that despite the uptick of COVID-19 cases, which this is even being considered as the beginning of the third wave here in the US, people are still being courageous and making their way out to the polls to make their voices heard. So that's amazing.
Right.
Great. By the way, have you seen, Maya, that there are various stores that are boarding up for fear of violence?
Yes.
Stores like Tiffany's, stores like Target.
Right.
So it's just really kind of it's scary to think about.
It is. And I know it's basically based on like people are kind of scared about if there's going to be violence after the election, depending on the results, basically.
Yep. So it's scary to think about, but we're just going to have to keep hope that, you know, everything remains peaceful, that everything remains peaceful and that we'll get the results and everything will be okay in America.
Right. It's in fear of like post-election results, basically.
So it's important for us to remain informed about the stances of the candidates we're voting for. So we're just going to take a look at the stances of the main candidates on the ballot at both the local and national levels.
Yes. So let's start off with discussing Lee Zeldin and Nancy Goroff's general stances on issues in this year's election, according to their official campaign websites. In terms of healthcare, Zeldin wishes to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act and supports legislation to lower the cost of prescription drug prices. Goroff supports the Affordable Care Act and wants to lower the minimum age for Medicare.
So now we're turning towards climate and the environment. Zeldin opposes the Green New Deal and supports protecting Long Island from rising sea levels and pollution. Goroff wants to make the U.S. carbon neutral by 2035 and focus on Long Island's water supply.
In terms of immigration, Zeldin supports legislation that revokes citizenship from naturalized immigrants who engage in gang violence. Goroff supports Dreamers and wants to enforce laws against traffickers and violent criminals.
So lastly, let's talk about gun rights. According to ontheissues.org, Zeldin opposes restrictions on bearing arms and supports concealed carry. According to her website, Nancy Goroff wants to ban assault rifles and supports more background checks on gun owners.
Now, let's look at the national side.
Yep.
Let's look at Trump and Biden's general stances, also according to their official campaign websites. In terms of healthcare, Biden supports both expanding the Affordable Care Act and creating a new public option. Trump opposes the Affordable Care Act and has taken it even to the courts to appeal it.
So turning again towards climate and the environment, Biden wants to end fossil fuel subsidies and put a ban on the new oil and gas permits on public lands. Trump has a looser image on the climate crisis due to economic factors.
Now, back to immigration. Biden supports a pathway to citizenship for undocumented immigrants and opposes decriminalizing crossing the border without documentation. Trump also supports a merit-based immigration system and the construction of a wall along the U.S.-Mexico border.
So again, with gun rights, Biden wants to hold the gun manufacturers accountable, but also wants to regulate the possession of existing assault weapons under the National Firearms Act. During multiple of his rallies, Trump has voiced his support for the Second Amendment, and he's eased gun restrictions.
So Biden has been leading in the polls, but so was Hillary Clinton in 2016.
Political science professor Helmut Norpoth accurately predicted that Trump would win 246 days before the election. He also correctly forecasted 25 out of 27 elections in the past, and he's now already predicted that Trump will win yet again in 2020. So our reporter, Jules Slocum, has the story.
Issue, our podcast intern, Juliana Slocum, interviews
Did you end up at Stony Brook?
Oh my goodness. Well, Stony Brook offered me a job. It's very simple. I mean, it's not like I look around at hundreds of opportunities and then I go through them and then Stony Brook works out. I mean, there were a few opportunities. I mean, as you may know, I mean, I grew up in another country. I'd gone to graduate school in this country, University of Michigan, and had a few jobs after getting my doctorate, and then in the late 70s, Stony Brook was hiring. I mean, had just been set up and expanding, and so there were a lot of opportunities here and at Stony Brook, and it was a good fit in my training that I had in political science, which was very methodological. So that's why also I'm able to do this kind of forecasting business, because it involves a lot of statistics.
Mm-hmm.
And Stony Brook was doing that, and so it was a good fit. And so 40 years ago, 79, I arrived here, and then never left for another opportunity. Got tenure, promoted, full, and everything, and so that's how it worked. Political science, I think this also got me to think about coming to this country. Was the 1960 election, the Kennedy election. I was 16 years old, and it was just the perfect age to be mesmerized by a political candidate. I mean, there was a certain mystique. I mean, we all know it. I mean, maybe a little myth making, Camelot, and I mean, just the whole bio of somebody like Kennedy just caught fire with me. And I remember, I mean, every day I kept a clipping file of stories about the election, and it was almost like an election in my home country. I never followed an election like this ever since. I mean, even professionally, I don't remember. And so I think, I mean, my interest in politics certainly was kindled, and particular the election, because the election that took place in 1960 and Kennedy won. And I think from that point on, I had a little bit of like the election bug. And then it turned out quite well that I went to a school in this country that did a lot of research on elections, surveys, and all that. And so that was also sort of a perfect fit. And so here I am. I'm still doing it, even though I'm way past the old retirement age of 65. So I'm very glad that that's lifted. And so I'm still full time. I teach classes. I taught my 2 classes yesterday, and keep going until I don't know.
And what classes do you teach?
I teach a class on, very fittingly, election campaigns right now, and another class that's very different. It's called America at War. It's a seminar, a very small enrollment, which grew out of, I think, my interest in, well, I think it was sort of like a post 9/11 thing that, after 9/11, the attack and the country going to war, and so I began to read some accounts of people in the field, like memoirs, embedded journalists, and these readings I think kept me just preoccupied. And then I thought I'd use it as a course, like have students read these things and discuss. So it's a very it's not a lecture class. It's students read, and we look a lot nowadays. Of course, a lot of videos, like Band of Brothers, for example, the HBO series which we went through, and or Ken Burns, the series on World War II, the Vietnam War, and documentaries like that. So that's another class that I teach. And then in the spring, I teach a course on voting behavior, like how people make up their mind to vote, and another class on foreign policy, so which actually predates 9/11, but I think became a very hot topic after 9/11, of course. So I've kept that going too. So this is sort of my course offering.
Okay, so let's talk about your model.
Mhm.
How did you come up with that?
Well, actually, I mean, a lot of sort of accidents or random things. And in fact, if I really be honest about it, I mean, I got an invitation about 25 years ago. Somebody invited me to give a talk on forecasting. I never done anything about election forecasting, and I didn't even know where this invitation came from, but it was very lucrative, appealing in another country. And so I thought, well, I used my skills, my research skills in statistics, and of course on elections, etc. And so put the two things together, and I came up with a sort of a model about predicting elections that was quite different from what I saw other people do, because I knew, I didn't want to just sort of review other people's work and say, okay, this is how they predict, and then you start thinking about how I can do something different, and things that people have overlooked. And one thing that people overlooked in election forecasting are still overlooking, and I'm sort of amazed that nobody has sort of caught on and try to give me some competition, is presidential primaries. I mean, if you're an American political scientist, you know anything about politics, everybody knows their primaries. Many people don't know that we've had them for more than 100 years, presidential primaries. And that's quite a long period of time to do work with something that might predict elections. And so I went through the records of primaries, because they're very messy. They're not like a regular election, general election, two major party candidates. So lots of candidates. I mean, this time, what about 20? Over 20, right? Democrats ran for the nomination at one point. I mean, maybe even more. Maybe some people even thought about it and never did. To sort that out is a little bit tricky. You have to make some sort of decisions to sort of prune it to something that's manageable, and so that's sort of what I did over. I mean, it evolved. I mean, it wasn't like instant boom. This is a model that I'm using now. So it began a little differently, but I think from about the election of 2000 onward, it's pretty much the same with a few minor wrinkles. So I take a look at the early primaries, in particular New Hampshire. I almost had a fixation on New Hampshire. That's it. I mean, because it's very early. So if you use that, you can make a forecast much earlier than most other people. And New Hampshire, because it's the first one, it's very competitive. It's very easy to get on the ballot for candidates, so they don't have to go through a lot of hoops. Like New York, I mean, New York is terrible. I mean, for anybody to get on the ballot anywhere, I mean, the requirements, number of signatures, and all this stuff, it's just such a burden. And so New York, I mean, also is much later. So by the time the primary circus sort of lands at New York, I mean, it's game over. I mean, nobody cares anymore who wins the New York primary. And so New Hampshire is very telling. Not totally, and I learned that the hard way, because somebody like Obama, for example, as we know, 2008, lost New Hampshire, still won the nomination, still won the presidency. And then, of course, you had Hillary Clinton. Last time she lost in New Hampshire to Bernie Sanders, came back, got the nomination, almost won the presidency. Okay, a lot of people probably think she should have been the president, given that she won the popular vote. I mean, by several million votes, etc. And then, of course, this time, even more, the most extreme case, Joe Biden. All right, he completely bombs in New Hampshire. I mean, he's in 5th place. I mean, nobody ever has recovered from something like this. It's unbelievable. I mean, a man, former vice president, he can't even, I mean, single digits. It's terrible. I mean, I personally, I thought, I mean, this is it. Lights out for Joe Biden. Third time you've tried it. I mean, we know he did it 2008 as well. Never got anywhere. 1988, never got anywhere. And I thought, okay, this is it. I mean, and then, okay, he gets South Carolina support of the Black community, which I think he knew, he counted on. He knew they were waiting to pull him out of that. And they did, okay. And then some other states like that have sort of lucky timing that, I mean, North Carolina, Virginia, Alabama, very sort of states with a large proportion of Black voters. And bingo, I mean, pretty soon, it's it. I mean, the race pretty much over. Bernie Sanders, the only one, I mean, who might have challenged him, and all the others had sort of dropped out, I think, after South Carolina Super Tuesday. And so now we're here, okay? Joe Biden was sort of I would say, middling primary performance, combining the two states that I do, and then Donald Trump, a sitting president. A lot of people don't even, I mean, expect that he would have to go through anything like a primary contest, but they do. Presidents are not given like automatic nomination by acclamation. They just go through the process, and he got 86% in New Hampshire, which is very good even for a sitting president. And he had people forget that too. I mean, he had a challenger of some standing. William Weld is not a nobody. I mean, he was former governor of Massachusetts, a blue state to it. And so that was not, I mean, like no brainer. So I think he got about 9% of the vote, and maybe just respectable for somebody like him. But for Donald Trump to get 86%, I mean, that's compared to Joe Biden getting, I mean, an average of maybe, which I calculate a few other things that I adjust because, I mean, it was a big field, like a lot of candidates. But still, I mean, the number for the primary number for Joe Biden is sort of barely 50%. So 50 versus 86. I mean, you do the math. I mean, so that does it for Trump. Plus, the other thing that doesn't appear in the name of the model, the primary model, is the advantage of being a first-term president running for re-election. And I think most people know from history, okay, that most, if not, I mean, not all of them, go on to win re-election. Jimmy Carter did not. Okay, this is a very clear case of that not happening. But for the most part, after one term in the White House, a president will go on to re-election. So that gives Donald Trump two advantages. All right, the first term benefit and the superior primary performance, and all that sort of is, I mean, some statistics that I apply using elections from 1912 through 2016 turns out to give Donald Trump a 91% chance of getting reelected. So that's, I mean, pretty decisive. And so from my perspective, I mean, this race is done. And I know a lot of people say, I mean, that's crazy. I mean, look at the polls. It's the other way around. I mean, I just had an email from a friend of mine who's doing a prediction based on other things, and he was very proud that his prediction, which is a landslide for Biden, was exactly the same number as 538. And I mean, you may have heard of 538. Nate Silver has a site, predict elections. I mean, he made a big splash in 2008 when he did this, and sort of a lot of statistics, but mostly polls. Okay, it's like all the polls that you hear about. Okay, he has a way of combining all of them and updating them. So people are used to something like that site, 538. They know that there's sort of a daily, almost hourly update, like the stock market. Almost like, I mean, you tune in in the morning, okay, and then a couple hours later, it could be different, okay. That's sort of good in terms of getting into the news cycle, because news, something new, okay, you want something that's a little different from yesterday. Saying the same thing is not news, right? I mean, oh, okay, well, so for me, actually, it's sort of a liability to make a forecast and then say, that's it, okay? And I posted in March, I said it's unconditional and final, meaning it doesn't change with changing conditions like the economy or the president's standing or a poll. And it's final, there's no revision, there's no update, period, okay? So people can't wrap themselves around it. So that, no, we want, come on, tell us, today. What's your latest? And I said, oh, sorry. So finally I went on Twitter yesterday because I got so many of these requests, and I'm sure I'm still keep getting them until the election and after that. And I say, sorry, I'm not using polls, and I'm not using conditions that are changeable, and therefore, sorry, but that's it, okay?
Why don't you use polls?
Well, because a lot of other people use polls. Then I would be just doing something like everybody else. But on top of that, remember 2016, all right? What did the polls say? Okay, Nate Silver, 538. For the most part, throughout the election year, gave Hillary Clinton something like an 80 to 90% chance of winning. Because with him, it's updated all the time, and at the end, he dropped it down to something like just over 70%. But others, like I remember the Huffington Post had a similar sort of approach. But they weight the polls differently, or they do other things. They, I think, gave Hillary Clinton a 98.5% chance of being elected. Donald Trump, that's hopeless, right? Day before the election, 98%, almost 100% certain, mostly polls, etc. And well, what happened? And these sides also don't just look at the national polls, which I understand. So if you want to make a prediction that Hillary Clinton has a 98% chance of winning the popular vote, fine, okay, you're right, okay. But if you make a prediction that includes states, and that makes an electoral college prediction, which they made, and they said, here's the electoral map, etc., and here are all the states that Hillary Clinton is going to get, and these are the states that Trump is going to get. I don't know what the numbers were, but they were very lopsided for Hillary Clinton too in the Electoral College. I don't know. A clear victory, okay, in the Electoral College. Hillary Clinton will be president. Okay, all of these sites, all of them that used some kind of a polling input did that. And well, you know what happened. Okay, it's not the first time. I was trained in polling and survey research, so I know a lot. So I should be maybe using polls, but I've seen so many examples, and one in particular that I think people have forgotten is that in 2012, Gallup, which is sort of the inventor of this kind of a poll, 1936, Gallup came up with this, sort of asking people how do you plan to vote with a sort of scientific sample, etc., and predicted FDR would win, and FDR did, and then so on and so on. And in 2012, Gallup's final poll predicted that we would get President Romney, right? Remember President Romney?
Mm-hmm.
Romney, right. Well, didn't happen, right? Mm-hmm. So what did Gallup do? Gallup went back to the drawing board and tried to figure out what can we do better the next time? Okay, they tried and tried and tried, and finally they threw up their hands and said, we don't know. We can't figure this out. And it's too risky to be wrong because we have so many other businesses to do. Politics is just one, doesn't look good. Okay, they want something where we can have a reality check. We're wrong. Like you do a lot of polling and ask people opinions, but nobody knows because, how people feel. Is that true or not? Well, we don't know because there's no voting. You have a reality check. The election comes and it turns out a certain way. And then you can say, aha, okay, this is the outcome. This was the poll. Does it match? And if it doesn't match, oops, okay. And so what did Gallup do after that? It quit. But if you look at this sort of polling summaries where you get all the polls listed. You look at Gallup, there's no Gallup poll anymore. There are hundreds of other polls. I mean, an unbelievable number. I mean, it's just crazy. It's a crazy business. But Gallup is gone. Gallup is quit. And
Okay, we are running out of times, and I do
Yeah.
have some questions I want to ask you.
yeah,
so
sure. Sorry.
I'm sure-
Okay.
Oh, no,
sure.
it's okay. I should have made our segment longer. But I didn't want to. Okay, so your model is calibrated to the Electoral College.
Yes.
And there's been a lot of debate as to whether the Electoral College has a place in our democracy. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, well, that I would say that's above my pay grade. I mean, I talked about the Electoral College in my class. We go through it, how it works, etc., and why people may want to change it. And the fact of the matter is, and we can complain about that, bemoan it. There's no mass movement underfoot to change it. Okay, I don't see it. I don't hear it. I don't get people ask me to sign petitions to abolish the Electoral College. Okay, it is amazing. I would say after the last election, you would find the Democrats just up in arms and saying, this is terrible. We were robbed. We have to get, I mean, of course, they were robbed in 2000 as well, in a way. Gore, okay, remember President Gore, right? won the popular vote too. So within the last 20 years, okay, two presidential elections, the Democrat wins the popular vote but doesn't become president. Where is the outrage? Where is the energy, the movement? And until that happens, I mean, I think it's idle talk to worry about whether it has a place or not. I mean, so long as there's no movement to get rid of it or to find an end run. I mean, there are a lot of end runs people have realized too, because I think the big complaint about the Electoral College is not what's in the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, but what the states do, like the allocation of electors to the winner of the popular vote in the state. That's a state law. Every state decides that. New York State could change that, could say we are allocating our electors according to some other scheme to sort of undercut whatever people think is the ill effect of the Electoral College. But worse, I mean, there's something called the National Popular Vote proposal. It's a very interesting idea, okay? It has some traction. I don't know whether you've heard about it.
I have not.
Called the National Popular Vote proposal. But it hasn't been adopted yet in enough states to make it work. And I'm not sure it ever will. But that's sort of probably the closest that people might come to make a change.
And what would be the consequences if we did get rid of it versus keeping it?
Well, to get rid of it, you would have essentially the winner of the popular vote become president. So you try to do something that would say, okay, we have an election, like in most elections that we hold, Congress, Senate, anything, governor, whoever wins the popular vote wins the office.
But
okay?
do you think that this would limit more Republican votes because there are more Democrats? Do you think it would swing heavily toward the Democrats?
Well, we've had more Democrats for about the last 70 years in this country. I mean, it goes back to the 1930s. We've had more Democrats. Democrats should have won every election if party is the only thing that matters. But you have, Republican winners. You have Eisenhower, you have Nixon, you have Reagan, you have Bush, etc. Who, the elder Bush and then the younger one in the re-election, who were able to win the popular vote as well. So, I mean, there are always some defections. And right now, actually, the balance is getting closer and closer between Democrats and Republicans. I mean, under Reagan, Reagan was a big shift. And he sort of realigned a little bit the balance between Democrats and Republicans. I wouldn't say that at this point Republicans are heavily disfavored by that. I mean, there's enough that they can do to make up for that. I mean, they've learned it. I mean, look at these candidates that I just mentioned. So I don't think Republicans would would necessarily have a reason to object to any change like that.
So, of course, we're in the pandemic right now. How do you think that this will affect your predictions for this year? Do you think it will bring up elements that maybe can't be accounted for?
Whether my prediction I don't understand the question. Are you asking me whether my prediction is going to have an effect on anything, or?
Well, I mean, because we're in the pandemic,
Oh, okay.
there are a lot of factors that are coming up that aren't normal to the year. How do you think this will affect the election?
Well, we don't know. I mean, we'll see. I mean, there's a lot of I would say speculation about that right now. People say people don't like the way Trump has been handling it. That's clear. Public opinion. If you ask people, I mean, are you satisfied, approving of the way the president's handling that? It's not very good for Trump. So if that's a deciding factor in the end, if people really vote based on that, then yeah, Trump is not going to win. My forecast is wrong, and other people who put more stock in that will feel vindicated. But I don't know whether that's going to happen. Whether people vote based on that primarily. These are the kind of things you can't. You can't predict ahead of. These are the kind of things you can't predict ahead of time. These are the kind of things you only find out after the fact. After the election has been done, you look back and say, "Oh yeah, okay, yeah." I mean, there's a high correlation controlling for everything between that, but it is certainly very, very. I mean, makes sense to sort of expect something like that when it's sort of the big thing that most people worry about and don't feel sort of really very reassured by how a president is handling this. So that's understandable. Yeah, I could see that.
So I don't want to end our session, but just in case the clock goes out, I don't know, sometimes Zoom will close at the end of whatever time you put, and I did put 9. So I do want to ask more questions after this, but just in case, I do want to say thank you for coming and talking. And we appreciate
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Enjoyed it. Okay. And anytime you want to ask me some more, come back. Okay.
Okay. So is there anything you want to talk about that you want people to know about, or anything you find interesting?
We can talk about all day.
Okay, well, maybe pick one thing.
Pick one thing.
I know that's hard, but
pick one thing. Well, I mean, one of the things that I find sort of interesting, if you I mean, make a prediction like that, you get lots of reactions. And I have an interview in about 2 hours with somebody from NBC, local, and like the New York City NBC station. And one of the things that I noticed that last time, 2016, and now, is that most of the requests to appear on I don't know, any kind of a news outlet come, of course, from sources who like the forecast. So people think they like it. People who don't like it, I mean, CNN, MSNBC, and I didn't hear from them at all last time. I didn't hear from them this time, and I don't think I will. Or the New York Times or papers like that. So I mean, people sort of misconstrue when somebody like me makes a forecast. Okay, they think, well, it's sort of a political advocacy. So I always like to preface anything, and I didn't do it this time, but maybe as a postscript, I'd like to say that any similarity of my forecast to my preference, okay, is purely coincidental and unintentional. All right, it may be, I mean, there are only that many options, right? So it could be that I'm voting for the same person I'm predicting, but if it happens, it's purely a matter of coincidence. I'm not doing this to propagate a candidate. All right, the thing I'm interested in at the end, number one, is to be correct. Okay, be accurate. All right, and predicted Democrats and Republicans to get elected. My first prediction, 96, that I started doing this, was Bill Clinton. And it was actually a little bit similar now that most people thought he was a goner. Okay. early first term did not go very well for him, the first couple of years. I mean, and he was really down, and people thought, okay, he's going to be a one-term president, like Jimmy Carter. And so I had and I did this forecast about 2 years before the election, like 94. Without primaries, actually. The first forecast I made didn't have primaries, just a kind of election pendulum swing. And it had, the title was Against All Odds, the re-election of Bill Clinton. And bingo, I mean, hit the jackpot. Okay, so that was a lucky thing. And then, I mean, it goes back and forth. So I'm not a partisan prognosticator who likes to sort of prognosticate the kind of party that I may like. And but it's very difficult to convince people of that. And so there's a lot of misunderstanding and both good or bad. I mean, people just send me these nice love letters. I mean, I'm so pleased. I mean, you're my salvation. I mean, now I can sleep better at night and all this stuff. And then other people say, oh, I got one. I don't. Somebody copied something I wrote for Newsday. Newsday, way back, I wrote they asked me to write something up about my forecast. So I did. I said that Trump is going to get reelected, 91% chance, etc. Somebody, a Newsday reader, saw that and was so irate. Okay, he clipped the article. Okay, and with a Sharpie, I mean, wrote all over it. Okay, sir, have you no decency, sir? Okay, I don't know if you remember where that phrase was used. It was used in the McCarthy hearings in the 1950s, where somebody said that to Joe McCarthy, because Joe McCarthy was lambasting a very respected military person, a general, for having been, I don't know, soft on communism. And this person said, have you no decency, sir? Okay, so that phrase is like, I mean, he said, you're irresponsible, you're reckless. How can you do this? How can you say this about, I mean, Trump? Well, that's sort of one reaction I got. And I mean, he put it in envelope, send it to me like by regular mail. I mean, I had a few other things to say too about this. He said, how old are you? Do you remember? Do you remember, like, of course, I mean, I'm not that old. I mean, I wasn't old enough to remember hearing it myself, but of course, from, I mean, my following of history and teaching it, etc. And of course, know that incident, know that encounter, and I know exactly what he meant. And okay, all right, that's what happens when you stick your neck out. Somebody's gonna try to chop it off.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's talk about what is the track record for your model and its accuracy. And I know that it was correct 25 out of 27 times. And one of the elections was the JFK.
Right. Yeah, the 1960 election, yes.
Yes. So why do you think that the model couldn't predict that outcome?
Well, I think 1960 is a good case where something does happen during the campaign that is not accounted for by the primaries. Even the later ones wouldn't have registered that. And that is the debates, television debates. Television debates were a total novelty in 1960. Never had debates, let alone on TV. And it was such a sensation. I mean, just about everybody was at TV, went home, turn it on, etc., and watch it. I mean, it was just the biggest, I think, sensation in, I think, American electoral politics for, I don't know, maybe since FDR's fireside chats. I mean, they were sort of the same kind of like new medium in the 1930s. I mean, going on doing these things, and people followed them just about like they followed the debates. And so a very close election. Kennedy and Nixon right before especially the first debate, which was really the most critical one. And Nixon was a very small lead. I mean, it wasn't a very big deal, maybe 3 or 4 points. And then the debate turned it around, and Kennedy was ahead. And then ultimately, I mean, it was very close, nevertheless, in the end. But I think Nixon certainly believed that the debates cost him the election. That if he hadn't debated, he probably would have won. And so he never debated again. Never again. I mean, when he ran in 68, 72, oops, no way, debates. No. So I can think of that. And so if something like that were to happen this time, and October surprises, as they are called, but they are things you can't anticipate by definition. I mean, a surprise is a surprise, right? I mean, when it happens, it does, and you just gotta roll with it. And so 1960, I think I could explain. 2000 is different because 2000 first was only half a miss, because I predicted that Gore would win the popular vote at that time, and he did. And I think the kind of oddities in Florida and one state about the vote count, etc., probably robbed Gore of victory in Florida, and by doing that, robbing him of the victory of the whole presidential election.
So your model isn't calibrated to the Electoral College always?
No. This is the first time I've done that, because of the experience 4 years ago when one candidate won the popular vote and the other one won the electoral vote without any kind of a dispute. I mean, there was no state that had problems counting the votes or the irregularities or whatever. And so I decided that it's very likely, I mean, given the distribution of the popular vote in some states like California, I mean, Hillary Clinton won California by 4 million votes, 4 million votes lead. That is bigger than her national lead. So one state gives her, and then the state has electoral votes, that's it. I mean, they can't trade that, can't give it to some other state. And so I can probably anticipate that Donald Trump, if he wins the electoral vote, would still again lose the popular vote. But the electoral vote, of course, is what counts. All right, doesn't matter in a way, maybe not good for democracy. Okay, democracy and Democrats. But so bottom line, we have to look at who wins the electoral college, and that's why I decided to do that and leave alone the popular vote for another day. Figure out why that is sort of so different, and maybe how to adjust for making a prediction about that.
Jules and Professor Norpoth. Now, as a reminder, remember to comment and send in any questions you may have. In terms of election updates, Trump has just won Indiana. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has also won his 7th term as Kentucky Senator. In New Jersey, incumbent Senator Cory Booker has won his re-election as well. Sarah McBride has won the Delaware Senate race, making her the first openly transgender person to become state senator. Polls just closed in Arkansas, and Trump just won as well. In Texas, about 62% of votes have been reported.
So now in terms of Florida, about 91% of votes have been reported. In North Carolina, 70% of votes have been counted. We'll keep you updated as we continue getting more news. Now, our reporter Rabia Gursoy has put together a panel featuring students on Stony Brook campus from multiple cultural organizations, and they're all ready to talk about the importance of this election for each of them. Rabia?
Thank you, Melia and Maya. Welcome, everyone, to our live election night panel on culture and American political life. I'm Rabia Gursoy, and I'll be your moderator for the night. I'd like to start off by introducing our panelists. Tonight, we have Carine Green, president of House of Shade, and we have Annabelle, board member of the Black Student Union. Before we get into the discussion, I'd like to give a brief summary of our topic. The United States principles embrace the ideas of freedom and equality, but it's also built on systematic exclusion and suppression of communities of color. This summer, the Black Lives Matter movement shed light on the needs of Black communities. Vote suppression has historically been an issue in the U.S., especially among communities of color. In 2016, over 9 million American adults were unable to vote according to the Center for American Public Analysis. The lack of participation in the democracy process leads to a lack of political power. As a result, people of color, especially Black people, continue to endure exclusion and discrimination in the electoral process. The reemergence of Black Lives Matter protests, along with the pandemic and loss of jobs, forced the U.S. to confront systematic racism this year. And now, for many Black Americans, it's turned the election into an opportunity to take steps towards healing a deeper divide. Which brings me to the first question. How has the Black Lives Matter movement affected voting in African American communities? Can we start off with?
Can you hear me? I didn't know. I didn't know if we tested that first.
Yeah, your audio is on.
Okay, and it's fine. It's clear. You can hear me well.
Yes, Carine, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Okay. I was gonna say for these communities, the imperative to vote has like increased exponentially, especially with the decrease in like approval ratings to the president. Like statistically right now, the president's approval ratings are the lowest than it's ever been in the last 24 years for this time of year. Like it's at 46%. And it's like when you see that, this is because a lot of the Black Lives Matter protests and the movement, because people are angry, people are upset that their voices aren't being heard and their rights are being disregarded and circumvented. And when people feel ignored or unimportant, they do things to take back, what's theirs. And so one of the ways in which they're doing that is through voting. People are showing up this year to vote in waves. And I think that that is a big result of what has been going on and our president's reaction to that. People see that he doesn't care. People see that he doesn't view them as important or as people generally. And so they're voting. And I think it's going to show tonight in the election.
Thank you, Carine. Annabelle?
Yes, I definitely agree with what Carine said. And I feel like the Black Lives Matter movement kind of encouraged people to get out and vote, because I feel like with the last election, a lot of people felt comfortable and felt like Hillary was going to win. And I feel like now they kind of have the incentive to just vote because our votes do matter. And by not voting, that doesn't do anything. And like Carine said, everyone is upset, infuriated, and we can clearly see that through like all the riots and the protests and everything. So I feel like the way we feel like we have control is by voting. So I think that's how the Black Lives Matter movement has affected voting in African American communities.
Thank you, Annabelle. And what do you think are some of the major factors that affect Black and Hispanic voter turnout?
Definitely to start off, I would say the accessibility to voting locations, to polls, because if you look certain communities, they don't have a lot of polls, and just with whole voter suppression as a whole, I feel like that's a huge factor. Like long lines and everything. Most people don't want to stand in a long line. Like, yes, we want to vote, but at the same time, like I have other stuff to do. So I feel like definitely the accessibility to the polls. Sorry, I took some notes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was also gonna talk about voter suppression because I have noticed that Black and Latino voters are twice as likely to have their votes circumvented or suppressed. And I wanted to give some facts. So according to data from The Atlantic, I don't know if you know what that is. It's like a literary and cultural commentary magazine and publication. 9% of Black Hispanic voters indicated that in the last election, someone in the household was unable to vote because lack of proper identification, when, as opposed to whites, this was only 3%. Also, 10% of Black respondents and 11% of Hispanic respondents reported that they were incorrectly listed or weren't listed on voter polls, as opposed to the only 5% of whites. And so it's just there are more statistics on their website, but it goes on to say that there's a disparity in over 50% of, Latino voters and Black voters, as opposed to the white voters who are being affected by, these policies who are being suppressed. And so I think that speaks to a system or a pattern of voter suppression.
And just to add on really quickly, I also feel like just the lack of knowledge about how to go about voting and where your voting location is and vote and if you're registered or not. So I feel like that's another factor that can affect the Black and Hispanic turnout as well.
Looking at past US presidential elections, how do you think racism has shaped these elections? Carine, would you like to start?
I feel like President Obama, for example, let's look at how race factored into that election. Obviously, race was a big thing because Obama was the first Black president. And even though he was biracial, he was phenotypically Black and he identified as Black. So he was our first Black president. And that opened up the conversation about race. But if you saw the shift between Obama's presidency and Trump's presidency, there is a disparity amongst hate crimes, and 60% of which are Black based on race or ethnicity, in which Black people are being, victimized. And so I think that increase makes this election about race, whereas before the election wasn't about race. Now the election is about race because people are being victimized, people are being ignored, and it's one of the biggest civil rights issues going on in our country right now. So I think this election very much is about race as opposed to other elections.
Annabelle?
Right. No, I definitely agree. And I also feel like because the Black Lives Matter movement has contributed to that. Because obviously within the Black community or just the minority community, we are all aware of the struggles that we've been experiencing because this isn't new. All the police brutality, this isn't anything new. But I feel like the movement has brought light to the situation, has shed light on it, and it just made it so that everyone else can see what we experience and what our community goes through on a regular. So that's why I do feel like this election definitely is about race more than the other ones. And just because so many people are frustrated time after time, just being treated the same way and people telling you that, they're going to help you out and giving you this false hope for nothing to be done in the end. So, yeah.
Thank you. So although Democrats have maintained a sizable advantage among African American over Republican counterparts for decades, support for Democrats has slowly declined since the final years of Barack Obama's presidency. Do you think the Democrats have been able to speak to Black voters' diversity and towards the change that the Black voters would want to see? Yeah, Carine? Oh, you're on mute. Sorry.
I would say that shift represents more of Black male voters because Black female voters tend to be the most reliable voting group, amongst all demographics. And so the amount of Black women who voted for Trump in the last election, I believe, was 3%, as opposed to, Black male voters. And I don't really know what is the reason for the shift in Black male voters, but I can say that there is still a very strong there's very strong rooted support for the Democratic Party and the Democratic community because they are still addressing issues that are important to us. And the Republican Party, because of Donald Trump, is being presented as so conservative and so non-representative of minorities. We have no other choice than to put our trust in the Democratic Party because there is no alternative. I feel like the independent is people say that independent makes a difference, but it doesn't, in my opinion. And so I feel like the Democratic Party is really all we have, and it's all we've had. So I don't think that there's going to be a continued shift away from it after this election.
Annabelle?
Hey, just to add on, I also do feel like there's more representation of Black people on the Democratic Party in terms of the people who are like actually with Biden and helping him and his staff. And I feel like they have just provided more, they provided kind of like, I don't want to say a plan, but they've given examples of what they would like to do for the Black community to help the Black community, as opposed to just not addressing it at all. So, yeah.
Thank you. Let's go back to voter suppression. How do you think voter suppression has united diverse Black communities and minorities, actually? Yes, Carine? You're
on mute.
Carine, can you please unmute yourself?
I'm sorry, I always forget to unmute myself. I'm so sorry. I think that there is a sense of solidarity built between them in recognizing that they are amongst a group of people who are being suppressed, whose votes people are afraid of because they know it's not going to be in their favor. So they want them to be discounted, for them to be, cut out. But they're saying together they can do it. Like together they will work to ensure that they can all have their votes counted, that they can all, be able to vote. And that's something that is, very difficult to do, but that's what's happening. I feel like people are uniting and people are making sure that they can, work together to get their votes counted.
Right, and I also feel like it's unifying us by having us kind of hold each other accountable to go vote. And everyone is like, did you vote? Did you vote? Did you vote? And making sure that we do vote. And I also feel like it kind of allows us to create a plan as to how to go about the voting. And I feel like with the use of social media, that's allowed us to also share certain things for other people to be aware of while voting, which can help us. And yeah, I feel like just holding each other accountable is the greatest thing, because I feel like we definitely do realize how much power we do have in our votes, especially for this election. So I think that is definitely a big factor, a big reason that it's unified us.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, Annabelle, you mentioned that social media has been a really big factor in even, holding your friends accountable, trying to spread that information. How do you think this new generation is taking social media into their own hands to promote voting? How effective do you think that has been?
I think it's been really. Okay. Is that on? Okay, sorry about that. I think it's actually been really great, because you see so many pages that people have created with just information and helping other people out with just information about how to go about voting, how to register, information about the actual candidates, because not everyone's gonna like do their own research and like Google it or whatever. So there's a lot of pages that you can just go to and they have all the information out there for you. And I feel like with our generation especially, we are really creative and we know how to talk to each other and we know how to get each other's attention. And I feel like by the use of like hashtags and just stickers, filters, challenges, everything that we do, I feel like that's definitely helped us in voting and bringing awareness to it. And like I said, so many people now especially have taken the time to do their research, and you definitely see them coming together to create pages and create posts. And you even see people who don't really know too much just simply resharing. And I feel like that's the beauty of social media. Like, even if you don't know anything, like you can just easily see a post that you learned something from. And now by you sharing it with your followers, you've also helped someone else. So I definitely think social media has definitely played a huge factor. And I think it's definitely benefited us too.
Carine?
I would say that I agree with Annabelle. People definitely are taking to social media. Celebrities, especially, are taking to social media and engaging their followers and making sure that they get out to vote. Other people, like Annabelle said, are making sure they vote. I made sure my friends voted. I brought a friend with me to vote, even though she wasn't like registered here. She was still able to vote. And so I always tell people who say that one vote doesn't matter. It's like, if I'm voting and I get my friends to vote and my friends get their parents to vote, that is now a network of people who are connected by the fact that they're going to vote now and that they're going to participate in our democracy and do their patriotic duty and vote for the president of the United States. You know, it's very interesting to see how social media has influenced that and how it's had such a big impact on people getting out to vote.
And on that note, how have you guys encouraged those around you to vote? Maybe social media, maybe, called people up to check if they're voting. How have you held others accountable or, yeah. Yes.
You can answer first.
Oh, I was gonna say, my friends, my family, they always know that I'm gonna harass them whenever it's voting season, whether it's for the president or it's for any other positions. So I called my family up. I called my sister today. I had a conversation with her about voting. I called my brother. I spoke to, my friends, and I post on my page like different things you need to know about the day of voting. What ID identification do you need to have? Just making sure that I'm posting on my Twitter, posting on my Facebook, my Instagram, a lot of information about voting so that I can spread as much information as I possibly can.
Annabelle?
All right. For me, I mainly spoke to people about it, like my friends and also my family as well, and made sure that they voted. Yeah, and also reposting information specifically with Stony Brook students. Here's the number that you can contact if you need help and where to go on campus as well. Yeah, so definitely social media has helped, and just talking, honestly, just asking my friends, hey, did you vote yet? Did you vote yet? And I even have a friend who just voted because they got out of their shift a little late. So I was just like, yeah, make sure you go vote. Make sure you go vote. Even if you go earlier in the day, just find the time to go vote. And like I said before, just holding people accountable and making sure that they vote.
Thank you. And what has your voting experience been in this election? Carine, you can start.
I would say for me, it's been pretty easy. I mean, I do vote on campus. I go to a college, university, and it's just right here. I don't have to really go too far. I don't have to worry about, voter suppression. I walked in, I voted. I would say the whole process took about 10 minutes. I didn't even have to show my ID. I just went in, gave my name, where I live on campus, and then I voted. It was very quick. I got a sticker and a $5 gift certificate to Chai Time.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Carine. It was actually really easy. I was actually stressed out about it because everyone around me kept saying, "Oh my God, I had to wait in line for hours and hours and hours." And I went in between my class, so I just had an hour to go vote. And I'm just normally an hour should be fine, but people were saying that they spent more time. But like Carine said, it literally took me 10 minutes. I just walked in, the people directed me at the rec, and that was it. And then after I got my picture and my stickers, and I felt good voting because this is a lot, for a lot of us, this is our first time voting in a presidential election. So just even having that power and knowing okay, I'm doing something good, and it just felt good, honestly. It was a little bit emotional because I'm like, oh my goodness, we're actually voting. But overall, the experience was way better than I expected it to be. Yeah. So I was pleased about that.
In the beginning, I had mentioned, I don't know if my audio was going on and off, but I'd like to touch upon that a little bit more. So we said with the reemergence of the Black Lives Matter protests, along with the pandemic and the loss of jobs, it sort of forced the US to confront systemic racism this year, especially since with social media and everyone posting and everyone just constantly talking about it and not letting it be dragged out by other things that are on news right now. So for now, for most Black Americans, it's turned to an election, sort of an opportunity to take steps toward healing or, healing a deeper divide. So what do you think America has learned from these protests? Yes, Carine?
I would say that America's learned that we still have a very big race issue, and that might have been, I would say that might have been not as apparent as it is now because we did have a Black president recently. But now that we have a president who is given a platform for not only out and open racism, but aggressive racism, it's like now we get to see who was actually hiding and who wasn't showing their true self. We get to see those people. They can now stand in the light and, be observed for who they are. And not only that, but when it came to Black Lives Matter issues, you got to see which celebrities and people came out and said things and which just posted black screens and, Black Lives Matter hashtags online. And, we get a chance to see, what this country is made of and what it's comprised of. And now people are demanding change. They know that there's an issue. It's not a question of, politics anymore. It's a question of humanity. It's a question of civil rights. And I think that there is a change that's happening, or at least a conversation that's being opened and directed by the Black Lives Matter movement.
Right, I definitely agree. I feel like the biggest lesson is that, like you said, racism still definitely exists, and it's just sad that people had to see like all the riots and everything. But that, I feel like that's just a representation and protest. That's just a representation of our anger and just a feeling like there's nothing else that I can do. Like, I've tried all other measures, we haven't been heard, so I'm going to resort to this. Because I do feel like not many people were aware. And I feel like Carine said, being that we had a Black president, people are probably like, oh, okay, like, it's okay, racism doesn't exist. But it's like, it definitely does. And it's still, and especially systematic racism is still a big issue. So I feel like that's only the real lesson that America has learned. And I think that now they're kind of put in a position where you kind of have to deal with it. Because I feel like before, we were kind of quiet about it. No one was really talking about it. But now that it's out in the open, because of social media too, it's everywhere. It's in your face. Like, you have to deal with it now. So I think that's why everyone's just like, okay, waiting to see what's going to happen. How are they going to respond to this? What policies are going to be created instead of just performative activism like everyone's been doing, like saying, I'm going to do X and Y and Z. Okay, I'll give free tuition. I'll do, we want to see action now because we've heard the talk already. And I feel like we're tired of the talk. We want the action.
Thank you. And both of you mentioned that, yes, everyone has started to talk about it. What do you think the next steps should be, concrete steps that, everyone should be seeing after this point? Yes, it's on social media. Yes, it's on our feed. But what else could we be seeing right now? Yeah, Annabelle?
Right. I would just say a plan for like policies and at least let us know what you're thinking about doing. And like I said, the action, because it has been all talk. It has been that for years, but we would like to see actual action and accountability too, and change, because you can sit here and talk about it all the time, but people are still dying. People are still struggling. Nothing has been changed. So I feel like the next step would just be the actions, whether it's a policy or it's a law or it's a change in how something is done, whatever it is, it's just action. I want to be able to look and say, okay, they're taking us seriously now. They're not just saying, okay, we're going to get to it. They're dealing with the issue, or at least trying to deal with the issue.
Yes, Carine?
I would say the next step would be holding elected officials accountable. Like Annabelle was saying, people have to be held accountable as well for who they're voting for and what these people that they're voting for are doing for their communities. If I'm voting for someone and they're not doing anything for me and my community, I'm going to vote them out. And so if you're voting for someone who is not protecting your rights, then you are contributing to the system that is oppression. Also, we would like to see more people, everyday Americans, going into, the political office. I would say that we need those more than politicians because everyday Americans know what other everyday Americans are going through. Politicians don't know what everyday Americans are going through. At least most of them don't. And so I would say that we need more people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I believe that's her full name. She is an everyday American who I believe is in Congress, and she represents the interests of the people. And so I feel like we need more of that, more accountability, and for both the elected officials and who the voters are.
So what you're saying is, if I understand correctly, sort of to diversify the people we have in Congress.
Yes.
Which go on to my next question. We talked about politicians. What can ordinary people do in order to start healing the racial divide?
Right. One thing that I was just going to say before is I feel like we can also continue to vote in the lower levels and not just the presidential elections, because those are definitely important too. And we need to vote for people who we think can bring about the change, not just the president. Vote all the people who are lower. I also feel like just holding these officials, as Carine said before, holding them accountable. And I feel like also just doing your research and knowing your rights too, and not just seeing that Instagram post or not just seeing that tweet and running with that. I feel like, you see that tweet about that fact or whatever, and you go and you look into it. So at least for yourself, you're knowledgeable too, and you're not just letting someone feed you information that you're not even sure is true or not. So I think moving forward, we should definitely do our own research, share what we know, continue to share what we know, and continue to put pressure on these politicians. And like the same way over the summer for Black Lives Matter, you saw it everywhere with the hashtags, with the posts, with the whatever it was. I feel like that pressure still needs to be consistent, and the fire can't die down. Because I feel like that's the only way. Like I said, if it's in their face, they are forced to deal with it. You can't just push it under the rug as we've been doing for I don't know how long now. So I think on our part, as like your ordinary person, that's definitely the things we can do.
Okay, so your question was, what can everyday people do to mend the racial divide?
Yes.
Essentially, okay. So I would say the biggest thing you can do is acknowledge that there is a big disparity. There is a big system of oppression that is in this country, and acknowledging that and also taking steps towards improving the conditions that result from that. I think a lot of the language regarding Black people and communities of color in this country has to improve. The actual showing of these communities, I feel like there should be more media, how can I say, portrayal of the positive aspects of these communities as opposed to, the crime and, the victims of these communities. I feel like that only creates a negative image of those communities, of these communities.
Thank you. And now we talked about the voting experience a bit. How has this election affected the people around you? Carine, would you like to start?
How has it affected the people around me? I would say, you mean in terms of like my family, my friends?
Yeah, just those you've seen maybe with the rallies.
I would say that it's created a big dialogue amongst me and my friends and my family. We definitely talk about the president more. We talk about voting more. We talk about politics more because we should be talking about these things. At the end of the day, we're all voting, and in order to, be a part of this democratic process, you should be informed. You should be engaged in politics. It should be a part of your life because you're casting a vote on a ballot that determines what happens in the lives of other hundreds of millions of people. And so I think it's very important to be informed, to be, on the pulse of what's happening politically so that you are voting intelligently, so that you're voting with an educated aspect. And so I would say people around me, especially, my friends, have definitely spoken with me about politics, and we've been having those engaged conversations.
Annabelle?
Right, I definitely agree. My experience has been basically the same as Karine's, and like my friends and I, we would always like send each other things too that we find what on both parties and just different information. And same thing with my family. My like I'm Haitian American, so like my parents, they mainly like listen to the politics about Haiti and stuff. But I feel like with this election, they've been more engaged and more in tune with the facts of the matter, and we have been discussing it more, especially since they can vote. So I definitely feel like just the dialogue is just increased, because in the past I never really spoke about politics. I never really cared for politics. I'm not going to lie. But I feel like this election definitely has opened my eyes, because I see like how impactful it definitely is. And I feel like some people feel more comfortable speaking about it, being that you can actually relate to the things now, being that it directly impacts you, and that you do have the power to help bring about that change. So definitely the increase in the dialogue between my friends. Yeah, that's basically it.
Thank you. And how do you hope to see America change in the next 4 years? Yes, Carine?
Okay. I would hope to see more inclusivity. I would hope to see more representation. I would hope to see minority communities painted in more positive lights. I would like to see more unity amongst Black and white communities and amongst all races, because unity is really the function of America. We're all different, and there's a lot of differences in this country. We're very diverse, and that's what this country is built on. This country is built on different types of people coming to America and making it better culturally, educationally, financially. Economically, I meant to say, like, all those different types of people make America great, and America doesn't serve its purpose, isn't function in the way that we know it to, in the greatness that we've achieved in America's lifetime, unless the people are unified. And so I would hope to see more unity, more inclusivity, more people together.
Annabelle?
Absolutely, I agree. Also, just with representation, like you said, I'd just like to see a more positive image of the Black community, Black and colored community. Just a showcase of all the good that we do, because I feel like with media also, they just portray the negative things. So non-Black people and non-people of color, you have this negative image of us, and it's like that's not what it is. So I definitely like to see that. I like to see an increase in opportunities for Black people and people of color. I like to see, hopefully I like to see the change that the politicians are saying they can bring. Like, I'd like to see that actually happen. And look, years from now, when I look back and be like, oh yeah, this, whoever the president is, said they were going to do it, and look, we're actually doing it. It actually happened. And again, increased support and opportunity, honestly, and a more positive image for the Black community.
Well, we don't have much time left. Is there anything else anyone would like to add before we close off?
I just wanted to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I am really happy that I got to speak about the election, because I actually am following the election like live before we got on here. I've been following it and seeing which states are which, the red states are red and the blue states are blue, but how the swing states are going to vote. Like, I'm just excited to see that, and this has been taking my mind off of it.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you again for the opportunity to share, to allow us to share opinions about the election and everything. So thank you.
Thank you all for joining us, and that's all for tonight's panel. Back to you, Maya and Mel.
Today.
14 more states have just closed their polling sites, including New York, which Biden has just won. Most of America has now closed their in-person voting sites. Western and West Coast states still have time to cast their ballots, including Hawaii and Alaska.
Also, in terms of updates, Trump has won South and North Dakota, Wyoming, Louisiana, and Nebraska.
So besides New York, Biden has also won New Mexico and Delaware. So just keep in mind that these are just projected results. We're getting them from the Associated Press and the New York Times.
Also, just as a reminder, don't forget to continue to send in your questions by commenting on any of our platforms during our live coverage.
So Americans are familiar with the clash between Democrats and Republicans. However, there seems to be another divide in America. Our very own Maya Brown spoke with Stony Brook University professors Yanna, Krupnikov, and John Barry Ryan on how that divide will affect this election.
So two political science professors at Stony Brook University, Yanna Krupnikov and John Barry Ryan, wrote an opinion piece for the New York Times about 2 weeks ago. The op-ed speaks about the way that Americans view politics as, quote, two camps bickering endlessly and fruitlessly over unimportant issues, end quote. There has been a large increase in political polarization in the United States, and our country is polarizing faster than any other democracy, according to a Brown University study. So what is causing this divide and what are the issues behind it? So today I am joined by Krupnikov and Ryan to find out more on the real divide in America and basically how it will affect the 2020 presidential election. So thank you guys both for being here with me today.
Thank you so much for inviting us.
Of course. So I guess we'll just jump right into it. So what interested you both in writing this op-ed?
So the op-ed is related to some of the research that we've been doing for about 5 years. Political science research takes a long time. And what started this research is exactly the very thing that you just suggested, is the idea that America seems like it's becoming so polarized that when we kind of look around ourselves, when we go to social media, when we look at television and the news, people who are of different parties seem to start to really dislike each other. And so we were kind of interested in seeing what has led to this divide. Is everyone like that? So does everyone dislike somebody from the other party? What about people who aren't really all that partisan? How do they feel about politics? And in particular, are there any voices that we're losing out or not representing when we really focus on polarization?
Yeah, I think the other thing that's sort of in there is that there's two sort of pictures that you get of Americans. You know, there's always this thing that people used to say that, like, well, more people vote for American Idol than vote for the president. And that's not true. There are more votes placed in American Idol, but people vote multiple times in that. So it's not accurate at all. But that sort of thing about, like, people are supposedly disengaged, but also there's no way that anybody changes their mind on anything because everyone's in such partisan camps. And so that sort of combined thing didn't really make sense to us. And so that's what the research is trying to figure out. It's trying to, A, put people into different camps, but also say, what is it exactly? If I say that I'm a Republican and I dislike Democrats, what do I mean by that? And so that's what the research is looking at, trying to figure that out.
Okay, got it. I know you guys tackle a lot of questions in the op-ed. So is the common view of a divide between Democrats and Republicans true?
That's a tough question, right? Right off the bat.
Sort of,
right? I think there are some people who do quite genuinely dislike the other party. And so for those people, the divide is very real and it's very true and it's really, really profound. They feel very, very strongly about it. There are some people who are kind of totally checked out from politics, who basically don't like politics and they don't like either party, really. There are some people who are fine with the voters of one party, but like really hate the politicians from that party. There's some people who hate politicians from both parties. So this idea of saying that everything is divided amongst partisan lines is in some ways simplifying what's a really, really complicated moment in American politics.
And the other sort of thing that we have to consider, right, is who are we talking about, right? So you're just there talking mostly about voters, but in Congress, it is very divided, right? And certainly divided along ideological lines. You do still get cross-party friendships, and but oftentimes you have these two people and it's like, well, we're friends, but don't tell anybody that, right? And so they don't work together in the same way because they're so afraid of being attacked by the most polarized voters in their party as being traitors to the party. And so it's difficult for members of Congress especially to do this. And so the members the people who get elected to Congress and then decide, well, you know, I kind of like want to be solutions-based, I don't want to be party-based, I don't want to be ideological, they don't really last in Congress very long because they decide, well, this isn't worth it, I'm not going to get any say. And so even if their profile starts to rise, say in the media, they often decide to retire and just say, well, it's a pain dealing with all these people and dealing with ideological stuff, and I can make a lot more money doing something else. I'm going to take the check and go somewhere else and make more money.
Right. What do you think has caused this polarization? You know, what has caused somebody to go, oh, I'll be your friend, but, you know, don't tell anyone?
So, I mean, so this has been, you've asked like one of the biggest questions that political scientists have been trying to figure out, right? So what has happened in American politics that has put us into this place? And there are kind of a number of things that we can look at. So one thing that has emerged is people have looked at the role of social media. There's recently, and this is now just about voters, it's not just about Congress members. So there's a study that actually just came out, for example, in the American Journal of Economics, where they tracked that kind of what you saw on your social media feeds really affected you. So people became more polarized because all they saw was other people like them. We've seen an increase in really negative campaigns. So not just campaigning, but like hyper negative, hyper critical campaigns. So whenever I turn on the television, we see ads from this campaign in Staten Island where a woman is literally cursing on the air at the congressperson. So that can't help. Researchers says that's kind of fairly bad. And then there are kind of these other just additional forces that have really happened. In the past, if I was running for Congress in New York, for example, I would assume that the only people who would care about my candidacy are people from New York. But now it's possible that people from like California could start to care about me running for office, or from a totally different state. And the other thing that's happened is that there are now a lot of these groups who will go into states specifically to try to get somebody elected. And we've seen actually kind of a rise of that, especially from the Republican side. But once you have that, that means you now have to appeal to kind of more polarized people to get them excited about your candidacy. And so you start to almost change your approach. And then before going on and on,
I've got another one, so I'm just gonna go on.
Another thing that's happened is that the people who are voting in the primaries are often people who are different than are voting in the general election. So people will come in, they'll vote in the primaries for like for real extremists. And then that's who somebody's stuck with for their general candidate.
And another thing that's sort of, so, you know, if we were back in the 1960s and you had somebody who was really pushing for civil rights, they were almost certainly a Democrat. And if you had somebody who was openly racist, they were 100% a Democrat. And so you had this problem with the Democratic Party. If civil rights was your issue, the people who you like and the people you hate are in the same party, and the Republicans are just the party in between, right? And that was true on a number of issues. But in the last 40, 50 years, things have sort of sorted out, right? And so this is good in the one sense, because it's easier to figure out, oh, I should vote for this party, I should vote for that other party. But on the other hand, it makes everything seem very stark, right? And so every Democrat is either good or bad, every Republican is either good or bad. And I think that also changes the psychology of how you're voting, right? Where you are you're less likely to say, well, those Democrats in Alabama are bad, but the Democrats in, wherever are good. And that's not, that you just wouldn't get today. It's just like there are Democrats, there are Republicans, they don't differ across regions, although they still do, clearly, because the Republicans in New England, the governor of Massachusetts is New England, a Republican, the governor of Vermont is a Republican. They're different from the Republicans in the South and out West, and so, but it doesn't feel that way, the way it felt, which was clear in the 60s.
Okay, got it. Kind of switching gears a little bit. I know you guys focused on the gap between Americans who follow politics closely and those that don't. So why did you decide to focus on that aspect?
So for me, I follow politics pretty closely because it's my job as a political scientist.
Right.
And I think when I look at my social media, everyone around it is basically just like me, right? Everyone is super tuned into politics. Everyone follows politics. It's probably true for you too, right? If you're doing politics reporting for the Statesman, everyone you know is following politics in some sense.
Right.
Yeah. Certainly right now, right? And then when I if I kind of encounter people outside of my particular bubble, or even sometimes my own family, I notice a totally different response to political events. They certainly know things are happening, like they obviously know there's an election, but it's less of kind of this complete constant attention on politics. And so looking at these ideas and then looking also at the research that had come before us, it seems that there were these real differences between people who said they were interested in politics and those who weren't. And so we were interested in kind of further exploring this particular divide.
Yeah, okay, I can say something too. But part of the other thing too is, right, that I think you look at a couple facts, right? So fact number one, so this guy in sociology, one of the professors there, Jason Jones, and one of his PhD students, oh no, it's Nick. What's Nick's last name? It doesn't matter. Nick, you know who you are. And he was looking at biographies, right? And what you're on Twitter, the Twitter bios, and what you're seeing is this increase in the number of people who put politics in their bio, right? Okay, so politics is going up. But if he put the graph of politics on the scale with something like that was art related or sports related, they're so much higher than politics that it's like, well, nobody's talking about politics, right? But at the same time, one of the things we know about voters is they all know who the president is, they know who the vice president is, they are able to identify who their member of Congress is, so they're not ignorant, right? So what's the difference between these people who know stuff and those people who, it's not just knowing, right? It goes beyond knowing. And it's like, it's my identity. It's what I view myself as, right? And so the question is, has that been going up? To what extent has it been going up? You still don't get the thing on Wheel of Fortune when they introduce you. It's like, I have a wife and 2 kids, and I'm a member of a party. That's not what people do, right? They say what their job is, they say who they work for, something like that, right? Their hobbies, but that's that sort of question, right? Is what is exactly going on between the people who care so much that that's primarily what they're focusing on, primarily what they view themselves as, and those people who, I mean, they clearly care, but but don't see themselves primarily as a Democrat or Republican or something like that.
Right. Okay. And why do you think that some Americans aren't following politics? Why?
Well, so the one thing that I kind of want to stress here is that what we're talking about is that some people have an outsized attention to politics. They are following it on like an hourly basis. They're, sometimes they're constantly checking their feed for kind of everything that's happening. So we're not saying that these other people aren't at all attuned to politics. They're just not doing it on the hour. And if you think about kind of people's lives, not everyone can follow politics hourly. Not everyone can constantly be checking their news. There are people who, don't have the privilege to really sit in front of their computers or even check their phones. And when they do have the privilege to check their phones at work, they're checking to see if their kids are okay or if somebody that they are taking care of is okay. So I think that it's sort of important to acknowledge that people aren't following politics on an hourly basis, not because they don't care and not because they don't care about who wins, but because there are just so many people whose lives just don't allow that to happen. And when they do have the time, there's so many things happening to them and there's so many things that they're worried about, that they're not necessarily gonna like check out the latest tweet from whoever and then talk to others about that.
I mean, and that's one of the things that people ask the question, like, so why don't young people vote? Right? Well, in some cases, young people aren't voting because they don't see how it impacts their lives, they do not care, and that sort of thing. But for a lot of them, they're working while going to school, maybe have a young kid, something like that. That makes it harder, right? So it's this sort of problem of, well, why aren't they focusing on politics? Well, in some cases, it's because they just got to get through the day, right? And so all this other stuff that, the government could do for them, well, okay, somebody else has to pick up the horse and try and help them with that because they just don't have the time and the energy. Now, that having been said, right, if we were to separate out sort of our survey respondents, right, we have 20% or so who are fairly checked out, right? And there may be very different reasons for that, and those vote at sort of a lower rate. Then you have another 20% who, it's what we're talking about here, you were talking about earlier, who are almost obsessive. Some of them are obsessive, but some of them are sort of up there, and so perhaps you might be saying they need to calm down about politics a bit sometimes. Then there's that 60%, right? That bulk of people, they're likely to vote in the presidential election, might not vote in midterm elections, probably don't vote in sort of local elections, right? So they pay attention to the big things. They're really engaged in the big things. They might be standing out online to vote, hours to vote for president, but they're probably not going to do that for school board, right? And so that sort of thing. And so that's how we're sort of dividing people up, right? The bulk of people are paying attention, they're voting, but, as we said, they have other things they're interested in besides politics. And then there's a small group who that's all they're interested in, and another group who, either because of a complete lack of interest or a complete lack of time, really can't participate that effectively.
Okay, thank you for breaking all of that down. Now switching to kind of issues. In the article, you both mentioned that you asked people to name the most important issues facing the country. So what did you find out? What was like the most shocking to you?
Well, I mean, one thing that's sort of, it's not shocking when you think about it, but regardless of party, regardless of, and now we should note, this was taken in January, so nobody could say COVID, because now everybody would say COVID. They might pick different aspects of COVID, but that would be regardless of party, regardless of level of interest, the number one or number two issue was healthcare costs. Not lack of insurance, that actually wasn't that high, but healthcare costs across the board. People are concerned about that. You did see certain divides. Republicans are much more concerned about illegal immigration than Democrats, much more concerned about terrorism than Democrats. Within the Democratic Party, you see interest divides. The more engaged are more care more about climate change. The less engaged care more about wages, how much they're earning, and things like that. But then there are also a couple things that you sort of wonder how these are being broken down. Republicans listed as one of their sort of top issues, like the fourth most common, I think, was fighting between Democrats and Republicans, right? So they think, oh, that's a very concerning thing. Democrats are more likely to say lack of government leadership, and you sort of wonder, are they talking kind of about the same thing? But in the one case, because the president's a Republican, the Republicans are going to say, well, that's the issue. In the other case, they're saying they don't want to blame, the Democrats don't want to blame themselves for having any part of this. It's, well, it's the president's fault, right? And so maybe they're talking about the same thing there, but trying to say it in different ways that allows them to make their party look better, or at least make it not look bad.
Yeah, and I think, though, one of the things, and this doesn't quite emerge as well in the New York Times, that I just kind of want to echo is this focus on healthcare costs, right? And if this is happening in January before the pandemic, I actually can't imagine what the concern would be like right now, with so many people basically losing jobs, but actually needing more access to healthcare.
Mm-hmm. Got it. And I know in the article, you guys also ask, how can politics better match the opinions of a majority of Americans? So do you have an answer to that question? Did you find out that answer at all?
You know, if we had the answer to this question, you know, the one thing that I always come down to is basically whose voices are covered by journalists and whose voices are covered in the media. I think oftentimes journalists are drawn to kind of the most extreme voices, right? Like the president mentions an extreme group, and then a journalist goes and finds a member of that group and elevates them and gives them a voice in the media. And I don't think that's necessary. That's beneficial. I don't think it's going to help anyone really. So I think a critical thing is really thinking about when politics is being covered, whose voices are being elevated, right? Are you elevating the voices of people who are forming kind of marginal fringes? Yeah,
I mean, but it is 100% difficult, right? I mean, we don't have any solutions, because if you think about it in this way, right? If you had two friends arguing, and they were, for some reason, this is a weird example, but they've decided we're going to make a pact that the only food we're going to eat for the rest of the life is the thing we've decided on right now, and one picked pizza and the other picked sushi, and well, they're fighting about it, right? What you'd bring in is someone from the outside who maybe likes both pizza and sushi, but really has no stake in this, doesn't care about this at all, right? And then you'd say, okay, you help us decide, because lack of caring and lack of interest is what is necessary for compromise and decision-making sometimes. But that's such a bizarre way to think about how you would think about an issue, is to say, like, you know, oh, should the schools be open in, you know, in terms of with COVID? And you say, well, we don't want to ask the teachers or the parents or the students. We want to ask this person who has nothing to do with this and ask them what they think. But they're able to approach it potentially from a more sort of disinterested, as they'd say, way, and that might help break through things. What kind of news story is that? Here's this person, they don't care. What do you think? Well, I don't care. Perfect. We need you to help solve this problem. It's so tough, right? And the other thing is, you know, when you think about the way politics, we always talk about mobilizing people and mobilizing people. And it's hard to mobilize people when your message is essentially, I don't know what the solution is, we're going to figure it out. And that's not really a great message, right? And so for why would people get behind you necessarily, right? And so I think it's hard for the parties to figure out how to represent all of their voters and then some of the people who could potentially vote for them, because, you know, those aren't the noisiest voices, but also those voices, you know, sometimes are if you appeal to them, you risk losing some of the noisier people. So it's really tough to make this all fit together.
Got it. And I guess, how does the divide between those who, you know, follow politics really, really closely, you know, hourly, and those that maybe don't as much affect this election?
So this election, if we look at the survey data, so Pew, for example, has been tracking how much people care about the election outcome for history. And this has almost the highest proportion of people who report that it matters to them, that they care who wins. I think we're at like something like 83%. So a lot of people really care. They might not check the latest tweet, and they might not check kind of what's happening every hour, and they might not know like these nitty-gritty detail of every congressional hearing. But I actually think they do care, and they care a lot. And a lot of them are going to basically risk their lives to vote in some cases, in states that are trying to have them not vote. So I think when we think about reaching people, What we're talking about is reaching people in the way that politics more generally. I think in this election, people have been reached, as you can see by the lines, right? They care a lot. And I actually think that's incredibly admirable and incredibly impressive. And I think it speaks to this point that you don't have to be with politics all the time to care about what happens to the country.
So I'll answer the question from a candidate strategy side, right? Okay. It's clear that the president's strategy is to get the people who care the most, the people who are, on the websites, on Twitter, and get them to drag their friends to the polls. I'm going to reach out to them and I'm going to fire them up, and they're going to be the people who, now, and that's going to be turning things. The most interesting aspect of former Vice President Biden's campaign is whether it's against Donald Trump or the other Democratic candidates, he's done the opposite. All you see on Twitter all day from the Democratic amateur activist tweeters are, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? And Biden's just saying, constantly winning. That's all I'm doing. I know I'm ignoring you. I'm ignoring everything you have to say, but that's because I think my goal is to reach out to those people who are maybe a little bit disaffected, maybe people in our surveys. What you notice, right, is that Democrats' view of their own party has gone down a little bit. Republicans' view of their own party over the last 10 years, for a lot of them, has gone down a lot. And you'd say, they got this group of people that I can reach out to, and maybe I can keep them home, because that's almost as good as a vote for me. And so I think that's what he's going for. Now, let's note something, right? He's a very old white dude. Who was a former vice president. He's been in government for a long time. That's the message that he's probably best suited to give, right? He can't give the, I'm going to lead a socialist revolution message. No one would buy that, right? And so maybe it's smarter strategy from a reaching out to undecideds, reaching out to potential swing voters standpoint, but it's also a smarter strategy because that's the only strategy he has. That's what's available to him. He cannot be the candidate of the Twitter left. And Trump, again, it would be the same it'd be a really weird candidacy if after the way he's governed and the way he's been, to suddenly change. I don't know, I think that would be sort of weird. So they're playing the hand that's strongest for them potentially. And for Trump, that's to go for the Republican followers of news, the deeply involved Republicans. And for Biden, it's to ignore the deeply involved Democrats to some extent, not completely, but largely to do it and to do a different type of campaign.
Okay. And were there any other, findings that you guys found out, in the survey that you were both doing that weren't, that wasn't included in the New York Times article that you kind of wanted to point it out?
So one thing that I thought was really interesting that wasn't included is that it turned out in bubbles, right? And we're not just in bubbles with people who agree with us politically, but we're all in interest bubbles too. So we're in bubbles with people who are basically just like us. And so I think, and I will say this about myself, right? I sometimes don't realize that this thing that everyone is talking about on my Twitter feed is something that most people aren't really thinking about at all. And I think it's the same for a lot of people. You don't realize basically that this thing that you're really interested in is something somebody doesn't even know happened. And for others, they don't realize this thing that is currently being heavily, heavily debated hasn't even happened at all.
I think the other sort of thing that I keep coming back to around this time is from a study that's kind of different from the project we've been talking about. But we did an experiment and we asked people, how are things going in the COVID response? But we randomly assigned people to one of two questions. How is the United States doing? And how is Donald Trump doing? And for the typical person, those are two different questions, right? They say, the United States is doing however, whatever they say. I mean, it was April, things weren't going that great. It was things are not so good. But then if you ask them how Donald Trump was doing, the Republicans rated Trump higher, and the Democrats rated Trump lower than the United States. But for the most involved, the most partisan most attentive people, if I ask you how Donald Trump is doing or how the United States is doing, I've asked the exact same question, because the United States is Donald Trump. And if I like Donald Trump, I'm saying the United States is doing great. If I dislike Donald Trump, I'm saying the United States is doing terribly. And it's sort of this thing where the good thing about the most attentive people is they have the most information, they're passionate, etc. The bad thing is they're closed-minded and they have this sort of very narrow worldview. The United States is the hospital workers and the parents who are taking care of their kids at home. It's not just Donald Trump. Right. And so it's sort of weird that they view those things as exactly the same. But that's the other problem when people say, oh, I'm not into politics, right? And then somebody would say to them, well, hold it, everything is politics. And they're like, no, what politics is those people in Washington, D.C. or Albany just trying to steal our money or arguing, whatever they're doing. And so it's a completely different perspective on the world, right? And so it's sort of an interesting sort of problem to think about. How do you bring those two groups together? Because within the groups, they have, Republican and Democratic divide. They might have racial divides, gender divides, whatever it is. But then they have also this divide of, well, hold it, where are we at in terms of what politics is? They don't even define it the same way. And so it's, it's really sort of tricky in that way.
No, definitely. I see that divide as well. Let's see. Is there anything else you would both like to add in terms of regarding the article or regarding any of the issues we spoke about?
So this is election night, right? So everyone will have already voted. Or else I would have added that everyone should go vote. But I'm assuming everyone should have already voted. So that would have been my conclusion.
Your side? Yeah. I mean, I think the other thing to think about, right, is so not to dismiss anything. Yes, it matters who the president of the United States is. I get that, right? But there's so much more that goes on in your community that also matters, right? Suffolk County legislator matters. And then all these sort of non-governmental things, sort of like volunteering at an animal shelter is also a really great thing that if you have the time and you can do that too. There's more to being a citizen than just voting. I always find it hilarious that you'll get people who scream, oh, you gotta vote, you gotta vote, you gotta vote. Damn it, I've been selected for jury duty. And it's like, well, yeah, but you understand your one vote on that jury has profound impacts directly on people's lives. Your vote for president does, but it's indirect and all this sort of stuff. And so, being a citizen is not just about going out November 3rd or earlier and voting, right? There's this whole other bit of it. And so that's always something to keep in mind.
Biden has won D.C. and Colorado. Trump has also won Kansas. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from New York and Ilhan Omar from Minnesota have also won their re-election campaigns.
Madison Cawthorn of North Carolina has become the first member of Congress to be born in the 1990s. Lindsey Graham has been re-elected as South Carolina Senator.
Polling places in Iowa, Montana, Nevada, and Utah have now closed. The West Coast, parts of Idaho, Hawaii, and Alaska are the only states with polling sites still open.
Many experts say that we won't have a declared winner tonight because of the presidential election because of the high number of mail-in votes. No state ever reports final results on election night, and no state is legally expected to.
So after polls close tonight, the real presidential election begins. Right. For all of those confused about the process, we have the deadlines surrounding the election.
Votes that are not counted tonight will be counted in the coming weeks. Under normal circumstances, mail-in votes must be received within a day or two of Election Day. But this year, because of the pandemic, some ballots can be received as late as November 23rd.
And according to the Congressional Research Service, states must determine the winner of their electoral college votes by December 8th. Electoral votes must arrive in Washington on December 23rd, and the new Congress is then confirmed on January 3rd. The new president is then sworn in on Inauguration Day, which is January 20th, 2021. Of course, a winner can also be confirmed before many of these deadlines, but this is how it can be extended.
Bringing it back from Washington, D.C. to our very own Stony Brook campus, the Center for Civic Justice on campus has done a lot of very important work for student voters this election. Our reporter, Kelly Alvarado, has our story.
Positive change and to better their communities.
Stony Brook University's Center for Civic Justice provides services and support that helps empower students to contribute to their community. However, the center has one main mission right now: to get students to vote.
So the Center for Civic Justice launched officially as the newest campus department back in August of 2019. And the purpose of the center is to empower students to create positive change and to better their communities. A number of ways in which we do that are through the right to vote, community service, and most recently, we adopted the campus food pantry as part of our center's work too. So my specific responsibilities with the center are to support the students who are very passionate about creating positive change in their communities, giving them the tools, the resources, the networking opportunities in order to be able to do all of those things.
I definitely see some students say, wow, like I didn't know this about this topic, and it's also good to give like a nonpartisan view to a lot of the topics in this election. So the thing with us at the center is we are nonpartisan. So we don't endorse any candidates and we don't endorse any particular party, and we try our best to give neutral and basically facts out to everyone. That's our main goal. So I felt like this gave students the opportunity to look at a source of information that isn't really biased. You know, it's kind of just like, here are the facts, and it gives you a foundation to figure out what you want to do with what you've just learned.
For this semester specifically, for this election, we want to have at least 85% or more CWOs registered to vote, 70% of them or more, hopefully, voting, and we just want 100% engagement overall. We want everyone to understand that voting is all of our responsibilities. Doesn't matter what age, what major, what identity you define with. I feel as though voting is all of our privilege and all of our responsibility because it affects all of us.
So in terms of how COVID-19 has affected Election Day, we've been working closely with campus partners as well as our county elections office in order to make sure that voting on campus in person is as smooth as ever. So our on-campus polling location has shifted for this election year to the Campus Recreation and Wellness Center, and that's going to allow us to ensure social distancing, ensure lines can build smoothly and move about smoothly as well throughout the space. It gives us a lot of space to make sure that a lot of people can be voting at the same time as well. So there will be a little bit more elections equipment than there normally is. So we're really excited about being able to ensure that all students who want to vote in person this year on campus, who are living on campus and registered to vote on campus, can do so safely and successfully.
So I feel as though this semester was so different because with this presidential general election coming up, like we had to up our game, so to speak. But in terms of COVID-19 procedures, like we were a little bit limited. So I think we did a lot for what we had.
We have done a couple projects. So one of the projects that we have done so far is we have had a collaboration with the EOP program. So the Education Opportunity Program is just a program for lower income students to get a chance like everyone else at college and kind of just succeed. So we found that a lot of incoming students in EOP don't register to vote. So we made that one of our missions this semester to target those students and to make sure that not only those who are just coming in as incoming freshmen, but those who are already here and maybe have never been able to get the opportunity to register can do so. And another project that we've been doing, which is pretty fun is we've been doing faculty-student digital engagement series. So we've been talking to different faculty members throughout the semester about various topics pertaining to the election. And the topics are things that we felt as a center were very crucial to the election. So some of the topics include climate change, the economy, government spending, and things like that. And the purpose of that was mostly to get students informed about these topics, and what better way to do so than to use the resources that we have at Stony Brook, which is the amazing faculty members that we have who are essentially experts in their field. So it definitely got a way for us to interact with faculty members and also give students a familiar face to look at when getting information about the election.
While I don't think the election itself is very different, I think that everything else around us, the environment around us, is causing us to realize the importance of this right that we have, and now we need to fully use it to the best of our ability.
Thanks, Kelly. In updates, Richie Torres of New York has become the first openly gay and Black member of Congress. New Jersey has also just made the use of marijuana legal. In the local elections, Zeldin is in the lead by less than 3,000 votes.
So now we have all seen an increase in social media engagement surrounding the election.
Yes.
Cerise Rindson is the Marshall R. Loeb Visiting Professor at the Stony Brook School of Journalism and is widely known for his digital expertise. Social media will definitely have an impact on the election, the candidates' campaigns, and voter engagement. Reporter Alec Lewis has the story.
I'm news editor Alec Lewis, and today we're discussing social media engagement and its impact during the election. Joining me is Sri Srinivasan. Sri previously held the position of Chief Digital Officer for Columbia University, Metropolitan Museum of Art, and for New York City. He is currently the Marshall R. Loeb Visiting Professor of Digital Innovation at Stony Brook University School of Journalism, and he's also a social media and co-founder of a social, digital, and virtual event consultancy named Digimentors. He tweets at Srinivasan. Thank you for joining me today, Sri.
At Sri, and I'm happy to be here, SREE. Thank you so much. I'm so impressed with all the work that the Statesman's been doing in the run-up to the election. And as we keep saying, it's not just election day or election night, it's election season, right?
Yeah, and that's especially because there's a lot of mail-in ballots going, and there's a lot of early voting going on before the election. You see packed lines. Voted early, but I'm expecting to go on election day. So let's start by talking about the presidential candidate's own social media use. We know that Donald Trump loves to use the social media as a primary tool to engage his audience and excite his base, especially his Twitter. But when you look at Joe Biden's Twitter, he also has a fair share of a Twitter campaign going on as well, including live streams of his own campaign events. What do you think of the candidates and their campaign's use of social media?
Well, we certainly saw that what was just kind of a novelty as recently as the 2008 elections with social media has become something absolutely critical for reaching audiences across different age groups, other demographics. And I think we saw that 2016 was where it made a big difference in the kind of way in which the Trump campaign was able to use social media. Even if you set aside the fact that the Trump campaign got help from all kinds of organizations and others, other outlets who were able to help them in what they were trying to do in terms of have an influence on the U.S. elections. It's fair to say that the social media game of the Trump campaign was at a different level than the Clinton campaign. If you fast forward to 2020, you can see that social media is something that the Democrats have done a much better job of this time. And in terms of raw numbers, we have also seen that social media has become a pawn in the discussion of whether social media platforms such as Facebook and Twitter are siding with conservatives or with liberals. And I'm happy to talk about that too.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. What do you think is the main difference between both candidates' use of social media?
The way that Donald Trump has used social, he understood social media and its power better than the way that the Democrats did in 2016. Now, I think they're both have strong social media games, but in the case of Donald Trump, the use of it as a personal extension of his voice, his personality, his his instincts, all of that's playing out on social, especially on Twitter and on Facebook. One of the things we've seen is that even though he often will post the same thing on both platforms, a lot of the attention is paid on what he says on Twitter rather than what he says on Facebook. But he knows that he can get his base riled up, worked up, and get them to participate in any way he wants, to take action for things online. He's been very good at that. Biden and the Democrats are catching up in many ways, and haven't made it kind of the direct focus of the Biden personality the way the Trump campaign has with Trump's personality.
Mm-hmm. And again, we're talking to Sri Srinivasan, the Marshall R. Loeb Visiting Professor of Digital Innovation at Stony Brook University School of Journalism and social media consultant. He tweets at Sri. And so let's talk about voter engagement. Social media is doing their own engagement campaigns, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I'd like to focus on voters themselves and participants in social media encouraging people to vote. Myself, I'm surprised by the amount of younger voters on social media promoting voting, engaging in discussion about politics, and showing their support for social issues like Black Lives Matter. And probably the most popular platform right now for younger people, especially, to do this on. And they have just passed 2 billion users, according to estimates, in the past few months, is TikTok. Can you talk a little bit about how TikTok's been influencing these campaigns in this election in particular?
I think it's been fascinating to watch the rise of TikTok, the fastest platform to 1 billion users in history. They've been not just an example of how people can be creative and use social media, especially videos and music, to get people talking about political issues and social issues and social movements and social activism and social justice. We've also seen TikTok become a pawn in the game of international politics. And shockingly for most of us, to see the US government force the sale of a private company and then decide which company that company gets sold to is shocking behavior on the part of Trump. But then that's what Trump is good at, shocking behavior. I think that part of what will happen this year for all of us to understand is that it's absolutely critical that young people do vote. It's easy to kind of do things online. The question is, will they turn out and be there for the candidates? Not just, we will obviously spend a lot of time talking about the top of the ticket, but what about down ballot and talking about the other races? Can and will young people turn out? That's what's so important, and that's why I think it's great that the Statesman is focusing so much attention on the race, and your coverage over the last few weeks, I hope, has gotten people, especially your younger viewers who are voting for the first time, hope they appreciate the sacred right that they have to be able to vote. I have 17-year-old twins who turned 17 this year. They're missing the election by a single year, maybe missing it by about 6 months. And I can see that they are motivated to get siblings of their friends to vote, and other groups there. They've been very encouraging. But I hope those of you who have had a chance to vote this year and have the right to vote have voted and will continue to participate. We need young people in this country to take more responsibility for voting and for participating, especially because of issues like climate change, which are going to affect you much more than they're going to affect some of the older voters.
Mm-hmm. And it seems that every time I go on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram in these past 6 months, I've gotten a notification asking me to register to vote or to promote or them promoting voting. Every time I go on, I just kind of want to say, I'm registered. Don't send me any more notifications. But they kind of have this institutional push about voting, and it's kind of been. And this is kind of a emerging development, right? I don't think this has ever happened on this scale until this year, right?
Yeah, so this year, Facebook and other organizations really pushed the importance of registering to vote. And at one level, I think it's just terrific that platforms understand that the more people vote, the better. And Facebook announced that it registered 4.1 million new voters. Registration just the first part of the process, as you know. The people still have to go out to vote, but the fact that they were able to do that is great. On the other hand, I think that a lot of the campaigns and others who want to use these technologies weren't very good at understanding who has voted, who is registered, who has given, who's not given. And what you just talked about was one of the problems we've seen all summer and into the fall, where you constantly are told to register, are told to vote, told to give, even though you may have done all of those things, because the systems aren't as smart as we think they are. And so we'll see this improve over the next cycle. But I just saw that in terms of giving money, if you gave money to one of the parties, you'll get, of course, flooded with requests to give more. But they're not even smart about saying, okay, well, you gave this candidate, you gave me $50 last week for my Senate campaign. I'm not going to ask you this week, or can you please just forward this to someone else? That acknowledgement, that the smart use of technology or better deployment of the data has not happened. And in this cycle, they've certainly failed.
And kind of the campaigns have also been active on those social media platforms as well, with a lot of advertisements. They spend a lot of ad revenue going into places like Facebook and Twitter, and making sure that you see all their campaign information and see attack ads and such like that. Do you think that both campaigns are doing a good job of putting their advertisements into social media?
Well, this is all I can tell you is what I have seen and experienced, and also some of the analysis around this. The fact remains is that that Facebook and Twitter have both said they'll be much better about policing fake information, disinformation, misinformation on their platforms, but we have seen them repeatedly fail to do so. So the question is going to be, if on election night President Trump, as he has threatened to do, says, well, I have won. If he says that prematurely, what will happen on those platforms? Will they immediately take them down? What else can they do to make sure that doesn't happen? We will know in a few hours, but the real question is, are these platforms learning from their mistakes? Are they getting less tolerant of these problems that social media channels create themselves? Or are they being manipulated by the campaigns and by outside actors? Those are the things that we need them to work on, so that we aren't kind of stuck in the situation where social media platforms are such a critical part of what we do that we lose track of both their potential as well as their pitfalls.
Yeah, and social media companies, I'd like to know your opinion. They've adopted policies trying to stop, obviously, the spread of misinformation, spread of conspiracy theories, such as QAnon and Facebook and eliminating Facebook groups. Facebook has been doing for groups that support QAnon. So this has also caused criticism against Facebook and Twitter for restricting free speech. How do you think social media companies have handled this spread of disinformation or misinformation during an election that has been predicted to be heavily contested and have the amount of stakes that everybody's been putting into it?
Yeah, I think you described some of the disinformation and misinformation problems. But let's also not forget the election season has been completely caught up with and mixed together with a pandemic, and misinformation and disinformation about the pandemic has also been weaponized by folks who want the simplest and the most unpolitical of acts, wearing a mask, to become a political act, and we're seeing that. So Facebook has 35,000 people who are working on their safety and security teams, taking down posts and taking down the groups, as you said, and conspiracy theories, but they're not able to keep up because the platform rewards that kind of information. We just recently saw on Capitol Hill CEOs of tech companies being grilled by Republican senators saying that, oh, you folks are against us, you are censoring the work that we do, our posts are being censored, when by every indication, right-wing propaganda, right-wing disinformation and misinformation flourishes online, sometimes 8 to 2 in terms of how much more popular and how much more engaged that kind of content is. And you know the term working the refs, meaning you keep complaining about the referees so that you will get the referees to help you out the next time in sports. We talk about that. That's what's happening, that the Republicans have made it absolutely clear to everybody and have convinced folks that the right wing gets the short shrift when it comes to social media. But it's not true. We have seen how companies like Facebook have hired and promoted people with right-wing backgrounds and done things to make things easier for Republicans, for conservatives, for right-wing folks, for people who promote hate and promote lies. And so for them, what the conservatives have done very cleverly, by the way, by exploiting this idea and making it more and more, it just makes it then much harder to cut them off or censor them in any way when they lie, because they'll say, "Oh, look at us, we're being attacked by the big liberal tech companies," when we know that tech companies are companies and what they want is more engagement and more people participating, and the more that the lies proliferate and disinformation proliferates, the better it is for them, because people will use their products more and will participate more. And they are so afraid of being labeled as taking sides between liberals and conservatives that they will do whatever it takes to please conservatives as much as possible. And final point on this is that also a lot of people in Silicon Valley are libertarians and believe that technology can solve all our problems, without acknowledging that these algorithms which determine things and say, "It's not our fault, the algorithm did it." The algorithms are programmed by people. They're not programmed by some magical machines. They're programmed by people, and those algorithms then make choices and cause lots of pain. I have seen this. It's not just an American problem, but a problem worldwide on these tech platforms.
And something that's happened in the recent weeks is the New York Post article. Facebook and Twitter, I believe both of them, took down all posts pretty much associated and sharing with that story about Hunter Biden's dealings with Ukraine and these sort of documents. Do you think that this creates a distrust from conservatives to these companies? And do you think that effect will ripple further in the coming years with maybe them separating to maybe a different platform, say liberals on one platform, conservatives on another platform? And would that just kind of result in the same kind of echo chamber that we're kind of seeing with these Facebook groups?
Well, we've already seen that, right? There's a popular platform, an upcoming platform that's not that popular yet, but that's being used called Parler, where conservatives are saying, let's go there because there's no censoring that's happening, and you can trust everything that's there because we'll tell you the truth. And it's mostly conservatives there spewing all kinds of awful things. And what has happened is that, as I was saying earlier, with the way that Republicans and conservatives complain about this stuff, you will believe that there is a conspiracy against them, that they are, being woefully treated by the tech platforms, by the media, things like that, when it's just not true. And the way we saw with the Biden story, even the Wall Street Journal, which has a very well-known division between its opinion pages and its news reporting, which I consider to be a very strong and independent and accurate news reporting team, versus its opinion team, which is full of right-wing propaganda. The news pages could not verify, and in fact refuted and dismissed a lot of the claims in the Biden emails, Hunter Biden emails. And this was being pushed, and because of Fox News and because of all these other platforms that push this kind of information, you would believe that everything in the Hunter Biden story is accurate, and that they were being censored and cut off and prevented from telling the truth by these other channels. If any of this were true, you would have seen a lot more blanket coverage by other organizations, because people want those kinds of stories because they give you an audience. And so for journalists and others to willingly walk away from it tells you there was something wrong with the story in the first place.
And I know we're talking a lot about the negative aspects of social media during this election, but there have been positive aspects of social media, particularly when it comes to jokes or memes. And we all remember the vice presidential debate and Mike Pence's fly on his head. And so what's your opinion on these sort of things, these sort of positive developments that have come out of social media relating to the election?
Yeah, and the humor is just one part of it. The memes are one part of it. It's also how much opportunity there's been to bring attention to specific topics, for people to organize, for people to protest, people to support the United States Postal Service, all of that. So I think there's a lot of positive things. A lot of folks are, complaining and deleting Facebook and just so angry about it. I still fight Facebook's problems, but I do it from the inside by staying in, because I don't believe boycotting is the answer. You want to stay there and make the platform better, make it answer to its users, and fight for those things. So I'm a much more positive person, but I have seen, and we'll need it, by the way, when vaccines come, and if they're effective, we'll want people to take them, and whether or not that happens will depend on part the way in which people think about them on social media. And vaccines in this country have been corrupt. The topic of vaccines have been poisoned by not just Donald Trump, but also by celebrities like Jenny McCarthy and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who have made it so that vaccines are a problematic issue in this country. We will need tens of millions of people to take the vaccine who wouldn't take it otherwise because they're so scared. And that's where social media will have a role to play. All of this we will know in a few hours or a few days, depending on how the election turns out. But we have a lot of work to do after this election, whether Trump wins or whether there's a Biden administration, to use social media in better ways to save this country from the pandemic. There's no doubt in my mind that the way in which America has failed to control the pandemic is a lot of the fault is with our political leaders, but a lot of it is also a lot of the blame can be laid on the doors of the social media platforms.
And do you think that social media has become the dominant type of media opposed to newspapers and kind of the news media for election information?
Yeah, I think so. The line between social, digital, all of that's become much more hard to define, and people are getting their news from all kinds of platforms, or even their Alexa devices or their Google devices or their phones, and it's all kind of mixing together. It's hard to even remember where you found something, where you heard something. But I think individual news consumers have a role to play in taking this stuff seriously, not hitting forward if they aren't sure something is real, making multiple efforts to check out the authenticity of something. My rule for now 20 years about technology has been, if you find something online that's too good to be true or too bad to be true, check it out. Like, why? Because if something immediately appeals to you and say, wow, this is fantastic, this is exactly what I've been saying, that's when you need to stop and say, hold on, let me double check that. Let me triple check that. It confirms everything that I believe, and that's why I need to double check it before I share it.
Exactly. Media and news literacy, definitely.
And Stony Brook has done such a great job with that, with its news literacy work. I'm very proud of the efforts that have been put in at Stony Brook for it.
Definitely important with all the misinformation going on. And I'd like to give you an opportunity to give your election predictions.
If you look behind me, I have these Russian nesting dolls behind me, the Matryoshkas, in honor of the Russian meddling that's going to happen. I believe if there is full and fair elections and the counting happens as it should tonight and over the next few days, that Biden will win. But given everything from Russian interference to the courts and the Supreme Court being on President Trump's side, that anything is possible. So short of a landslide tonight, where it is just impossible for Trump to say that there was something wrong, we're in for some pain and concern over the next few days. At the very least, in 2000, it was an election where we were not expecting anything. It took 36 days, and the direct interference and meddling by the Supreme Court to stop the democratic process that put George W. Bush in the White House. And so anything is possible.
All right. Well, all we can hope is that the election is fair and that social media and the media has done its job of informing voters all around the country and allowing them to put all their opinions and all the facts together and make the best decision that they think is good for America. Thank you very much, Shri. I really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to talk with me today.
Thank you, and congrats to the team on a fabulous set of coverage, days, nights, months of coverage that have informed not just the Stony Brook student community, alumni, Long Island, and so much further.
Thanks, Alec. Zeldin is still ahead of Gorov with 20,000 votes. Republican Mario Materas leads by almost 12,000 votes in the local Senate race.
Now, back to the presidential election. Biden has won New Hampshire and Trump has won Missouri. Trump is leading the popular vote, while Biden remains at the helm with the Electoral College vote. Democrats are projected to keep the House as well.
People in the United States have very different opinions on topics ranging from healthcare to immigration. Reporters Cindy Mazaku and Fanny Frankel spoke to various Stony Brook students on many issues that come up in this election. Keep in mind, these are students, not experts. This is a casual discussion about their opinions on the presidential candidates and their policies.
Good evening. This is Cindy Mazaku, the opinions editor at the Statesman.
I'm Fanny Frankel. I'm the assistant opinions editor at the Statesman.
Tonight, we're holding a roundtable discussion to talk about the election, the candidates' policies, and political issues that the students who are here with us today care about. To start, I'd like to first introduce everyone. To the right of me is Anya Marquardt, who is a sophomore English major and is minoring in journalism. She has been a staff writer for Statesman Opinions since the fall semester of 2019. Here we have Steve McNear, who is a junior journalism and history double major and is also writing for the Statesman and started this semester. To the left of me is Kenny Rothwell, who is a sustainability major and is a junior and also is the president of College Republicans. So the first question I'd like to ask is, why is this election significant to you?
I'll start. I find this election to be really significant just because I feel like as college students, we're all in a really important place in our lives. And I mean, obviously there's a lot going on right now between the pandemic, between the Supreme Court, healthcare, all of this. There's a lot going on right now. And the next president of the United States is really going to determine where we go from here. We're at a very pivotal point in our country right now.
Yeah, I completely agree. To really follow up, I think we've reached a moment where we're kind of at like a social clash, political clash, and economical clash, where a lot of things are starting to boil over. And whoever is going to lead this country the next 4 years has to be prepared to handle these changes. Things like Black Lives Matter and other issues like healthcare and the Supreme Court aren't going to end once we have a president picked. So it's really important that we set forth the right, we pick the right person to lead us moving forward.
I agree with both of you. I think, definitely the country's very divided right now, and the next president's going to have a lot, whether, how we're going to handle the issues right now happening, whether we're divided in the pandemic and hold, the pandemic is unprecedented. We haven't had anything like this in modern times. So it's definitely going to be, how we handle that, how we handle reopening the economy and handling, making sure we have the right COVID testing and everything. A lot of that's going to fall on who the next president is.
And what do you guys think about former Vice President Joe Biden as the Democratic nominee?
I mean, personally, he wasn't the nominee who I was looking for at first. I didn't think that he was going to be our nominee personally. After watching all of the Democratic debates, the issues that people are talking about, he wasn't leading in the polls at first. So I didn't really think we were going to get to this point. I feel like, the experience he has is helpful. I think he's got his time in the White House. He's got his time in Congress. But honestly, once again, these are unprecedented times. You never know what to expect from these candidates.
Yeah, I do have to agree that Joe Biden was certainly not the person I would have picked out of the field of Democratic nominees. I personally was looking for more for Bernie Sanders, but I probably should have been more realistic with my expectations on that. But nevertheless, Joe Biden is the one representing the Democratic Party, and it is what it is. I wasn't really a big fan of the Obama administration looking back at what they accomplished. And so I guess a lot of that sentiment really carries over to Biden, and I still have some questions about his career work, and I'm sure we'll discuss more of that as we progress, but that's how I feel on him.
I was surprised too with him becoming a nominee. I kind of thought actually he would get more support because he worked with the Obama administration, so I kind of thought the people who were for Obama would also go over towards Joe, just because he was his vice president. But I personally feel that Joe Biden's been in government for over 40 years and he hasn't got much done. So it's a big part. We need a president. I don't like career politicians, so we need someone new to get in there. President Trump has never been in politics before, to 4 years ago. So
That leads me to my next question. How do you guys think Donald Trump did in office these past 4 years? What policies did he push that you guys thought were effective, and which ones were you guys dissatisfied with?
Personally, I wasn't a fan of how these past 4 years have gone. I think this has been a time of civil, social, economic unrest. I mean, sometimes things just fall into your lap, but what really matters in the end is how you deal with it. The coronavirus pandemic could have been handled differently. There was evidence that this was going to be bad, and nothing was done about it. And now over 200,000 Americans are dead. That's millions of Americans who are now missing someone at their dinner table at night, who are missing a friend, a family member, a loved one. And it's just really unfortunate that we've gotten to this point. I wouldn't have voted for him if I could have. I was a sophomore in high school, so it was a different time back then. And now, I want to see some change. I feel like hopefully Joe Biden can bring some stability to the table that we haven't had in a long time.
The Trump administration, if anything, has been remarkably unremarkable. When we look back at his accomplishments 20 years from now, there's not much I feel like we're actually going to be able to discuss. I mean, look at a lot of his campaign promises. They just haven't necessarily come into fruition. And even now, and Kenny, I hope you correct me if I'm wrong, we still really don't know what he's planning to do if he does win a second term. But I forgot what the question was. Could you repeat the question for me?
Yeah, just ask what policies do you think were effective, or which ones did you not like so much?
Oh, thank you. So I was going to kind of get to the point of COVID-19, where I think the last 6 months have absolutely shown that he's not qualified to lead this country moving forward. And I believe it's also derailed his re-election campaign completely. And he has just shown, and I'm not discussing his personal character, because that's just a different discussion. But as a president, I would, like I said, it's been remarkably unremarkable.
all right, well, I'm gonna go ahead and say, prior to COVID is an unprecedented time. We've never seen this before, and I imagine for any president it'd be incredibly stressful. This whole thing is totally new to everyone. But I would say before COVID started, basically before February 2020, when we have in the U.S., the economy was at all-time highs. The stock market's been at all-time highs. Unemployment's been at the lowest it's ever been, and people are making more. A lot of we have lower tax rates, which really does help everyone in the end. And it got a lot of companies to come back to the United States. Manufacturing definitely increased significantly, specifically in like the Midwest. In car manufacturing stuff. We had Ford was supposed to move to Mexico. They ended up coming back to the U.S. And the COVID response is really interesting. I mean, I'm very interested to see what's going to happen going forward. I do think we've made great strides. We should have a vaccine soon, within the next couple coming months. So a big thing with President Trump's Operation Warp Speed. We're really trying to get all the testing and stuff that's needed. The PPE did come. The hospital is definitely fully stocked on PPE right now. So he definitely kept his promises to get that. And it's definitely it's an interesting situation right now with COVID-19. So it'll be interesting to see what happens going forward. But I think the president's going to be able to handle it well.
What political issues do you care about, and how has the candidate of your choice tackled those issues?
Personally, just right now, I think we've seen the amount of civil unrest in our country. We're at a crossroads, and I feel like whoever the next president is, whether it be 4 more years of President Trump in office or Joe Biden taking over, we need someone who's really going to focus on civil rights. I mean, abortion rights are being threatened. LGBTQ rights are being threatened. Black Lives Matter is being pushed to the side. Even like economic issues, the as great as the economy might have been before COVID, it is tumbled to the ground. Unemployment is high. People are on food stamps. People can't feed their families. There's a lot going on, and it's really caused such a mess. And we really need someone right now to fix it. And it's a very daunting thing to do. But I just feel like these are all things that are going to affect us as college students. In the next 4 years, we'll all have graduated. Like in the next 4 years, we will be entering the workforce. We will be looking for places to live. We'll be looking to make lives for ourselves. And the next president is going to determine if we're able to do that and how we're able to do that.
I have a follow-up question. How do you think President Trump should have handled the coronavirus situation when he did find out?
I think that he should have been much more strict on it. As much as it sucks to see the economy go down the drain after everything that he had worked for with it, you know, at the end of the day, are human lives more important, or is the amount of money we make more important? Because look how many people died. We should have taken this seriously from the beginning. It shouldn't have been like a lockdown in some states. We were lucky New York locked down when it did. It would have been nice if it was a little earlier, but we were one of a few states to do it. Not every state went into a strict lockdown. How many people died in these states? We could have done a lot better if, you know, the federal government understood how big of a deal this was. It's not mandated to wear a mask in certain places. It should be. In New York State, we're lucky that we have that as an actual mandate, but that's not the deal everywhere. And it's been proven that wearing a mask is very helpful and very safe. But we aren't at that point, and it's sad that almost 8 months after this has started, we're still really not doing much. Numbers are rising again, and it's really unfortunate that it's happening once again.
Kenny?
I have an interesting response. You know, I found it interesting too. You said that we should have closed down earlier. I think I wish that the parties, both Republicans and Democrats, worked better together to find out like how to close and stuff. Because like when President Trump stopped travel to China, Nancy Pelosi and a bunch of the other Democrats went to Chinatown to say it's wrong that we're we're banning travel to China. And now, you know, we see what happens and we look like, you know, it's probably good that we stop travel. And I mean, now basically no one's traveling right now, whether through their own or where they're going. You know, it's safer to stay home right now as much as you can. And with the mask, it's the interesting part. You know, I definitely believe that it's best to leave the stuff up to the states, because if you have states with really low numbers, I mean, wearing a mask, I don't find it to be a big deal. I mean, I don't mind wearing it too much, you know, it fogs up your glasses and stuff every so often, but, you know, it's not, you know, that difficult. You know, I hope that people follow it. And, you know, and a big part is it's definitely on the individual too. You know, don't go to social gatherings, don't have them, you know, you only can enforce it so much. Enforcement's a big thing. So I think it was best to leave decisions up to the states. So it's how they're going to handle the virus.
That's a really interesting point you bring up, Kenny, and I'm going to answer the question in a moment. But I really feel like this whole dilemma of, or I wouldn't call it a dilemma, but this idea that Americans have where it's their personal right to choose whether they wear a mask. I feel like that's such a big reason for why we are in the issues, why we're facing the issues we're facing now. You see so many people that think, well, if the government's telling me to wear a mask, and this can be state or federal level, where if they're telling me to wear a mask, my personal freedoms are being infringed upon. And as a result, that's like not democratic, so I'm not going to do it. And I just, I really hope that whoever wins this election kind of sets the record straight, and I really hope that regardless of Trump or Biden, they listen to the experts. But on the most important topic for this election, to me, it's easily economic inequality. I mean, look at how many people have profited from the COVID pandemic. We talk about the economy collapsing, but it's collapsing for people, working class people, people who live paycheck to paycheck or 1 or 2 paychecks, you know, away from a disaster. I actually mentioned it in an opinion piece that's coming out soon that the average 40% of Americans are living only off of 2 paychecks, meaning that if something were to happen to them tomorrow and they'd only have like a month's worth of savings to live on, we need to address why in this country you can't afford an apartment off minimum wage anymore. We need to address why people are benefiting off of other people's debts. We need to look into so many of these problems. And honestly, do I expect Biden or Trump to talk about it at all? No, because both of them have their reasons for why they wouldn't want things to change. And of course, I do agree that social issues like Black Lives Matter, those are beyond important, and I'm not downplaying their importance. But to me, once we address things like economic inequality and try to make lives better for the working class, then a lot of those issues, I believe, will solve themselves naturally.
I do agree with you on that. I definitely think that economic inequality is going to be something that will help to improve social issues. I think that they really do go hand in hand. I do agree as well. I feel like when it comes to the masks, there's some things that the national government needs to take a stand on. If there is scientific proof and data that a mask can prevent the spread of COVID-19, it should have been required. As much as I understand that there is the balance between, the checks and balances between the states and the national government, this wasn't really something that should have been a controversial idea, but people are seeing it as infringing on their rights, infringing on their freedom of speech. We can all talk while wearing masks. We're doing it right now. I mean, this isn't something where we're trying to muffle each other. We're just trying to keep each other safe, because at the end of the day, we're trying to protect human lives here. We're trying to protect our immune compromised relatives, friends, and families. It's nothing more than that. We're not trying to muffle each other or keep each other from voicing our opinions.
Stephen, I'd like to go back to you for a quick moment. I know you said you want to vote for the third party. Can you tell me a little bit more about why you want to do so?
So I guess the cat's out of the bag. I am voting for Howie Hawkins in the Green Party, or I already have voted for Howie Hawkins in the Green Party. And I brought up the article that's coming out soon, but I'm going to reiterate my points. Essentially, I believe, first off, I don't consider myself, I'm not a capitalist, so I'm not voting for two capitalist candidates between them. And the second and more important point I bring up is we live in New York. We're in New York. New York has not gone Republican since 1984 with Ronald Reagan. The reality is my votes, my opinions don't ultimately matter on the federal level. I could vote for myself, I could vote Republican, I could vote Democrat. It won't change the fact that Joe Biden is more than likely going to win New York with no difficulties. So without getting too further into it, I believe there are a lot of incentives toward voting third party that aren't really discussed about. And while I do ultimately believe that Hawkins will not win, I mean, I'd be willing to bet everything he will not win. As I mentioned, there are other incentives toward investing my vote into a candidate who better aligns with my values.
All right, so what are your thoughts on the presidential debates that have happened these past few weeks?
I learned close to nothing valuable about either candidate from these. The first one, I would have turned it off if I didn't have an assignment on it. I was embarrassed for our country to watch that happen. The way that both of them acted, as much as I felt President Trump did not act the way a president should be acting, neither of them acted like they wanted to be the president of the United States for the next 4 years. It was like a cat fight. It was embarrassing to watch on national television and be like, all right, one of these men are leading our country soon. Like that's not really fantastic. And the second debate, as much as it was a little more muted, it still was just as bad. I mean, I'm not getting anything fantastic out of these. I mean, I was already a decided voter before coming into this, but at the same time, like, I know undecided voters, and the undecided voters I know still don't know what to do, because what do you gain from this other than watching two men over the age of 70 yell at each other from 10 feet apart? You gain nothing from it.
Yeah, I have to agree. Ultimately, it was a failure. It was a failure for Trump, a failure for Biden, but more importantly, it was a failure for the American people. To call the first debate an embarrassment would be an understatement to how awful it was. It was, and I've been covering the debates for Statesman. That was one of the worst things I've ever watched in my life, and I'm not even. There's no nice way to put it. There are millions of lives at stake, regardless of which candidate you support. There are so many people that over the next 4 years, their lives are going to be drastically affected by the policies these two presidents or potential presidents push forward. And to see them going back and forth not only shows that our current debate format is awful and it needs to be radically overhauled, but that are these two people really the most qualified? Is our voting system that? Is this what America is? Is America either Joe Biden or Donald Trump? And it's a really hard thought to process. And despite what I just said, I actually was going into these debates with the hope that maybe Biden could win me over. So I'm not, well, I think I'm a little stubborn. I'm not that stubborn to the point where I would completely close down the hopes of voting for somebody. So I gave Biden a shot. And while I think he did the right thing to the American public and let Trump talk and play on the counterattack, it didn't win me over. And it just proved that everything I'd already mentioned, kind of.
Yeah, I agree with both you. The first presidential debate was a disaster, honestly. It was, I don't think anyone learned anything from it or got anything out of it. I just heard more back and forth, you know. When I was watching, I'm like, is this real? It was kind of, my reaction. I don't know, I'll be totally honest, And then we had the vice presidential debate. I feel the vice presidential debate was more of an example of how the debate should go. Both candidates were civil. We heard policy from both, basically. And it was definitely the example of what the superior candidates should be doing. And then this second, or what should have been third, the final presidential debate, I feel we got it still wasn't perfect. We got a little bit more out of their policy. I don't know if it was really convincing. I do think that Joe Biden's statement at the end about oil could definitely affect his chances of winning, oil producing states, Pennsylvania, Oklahoma, Texas, those big states. I think that, that's definitely can hurt Biden's chances of winning those oil producing states, which a lot of them, like Pennsylvania, are swing states too. So I think that part went in Trump's favor. But overall, I was hoping to hear a lot more about policy and more of a civil, not just beating up each other in the debates.
Yeah, I have to agree. The vice president debate, if you can call it a highlight of this entire election cycle, that would probably be of all the town halls and debates, that was by far the most, I guess, what a debate should be like. Although it disappoints me that voters, their biggest takeaway of the night was the fly on Mike Pence's head.
Yeah,
I think that's
wish that we could overlook that.
Yeah, because there was a lot of stuff that was said.
Yeah.
And especially when, we already had saw the first presidential debate by that point. That was, there was more important things to look at from that night. But, Twitter will be Twitter.
Yeah, I think I got more out of the vice presidential debate, and I think any undecided voters probably got more out of the vice presidential than the presidential debates.
I mean, you have to look at it like that. The reality is, regardless of who wins, by the time their term is over, they'll be the oldest president ever. And I hate to be that person, but the average life expectancy in the United States isn't. They're starting to kind of exceed that. So while I'm not saying anything will happen, it's important to know who's playing backup, because sometimes something happens. And
with COVID and stuff too.
Donald Trump got COVID, and while Mike Pence didn't have to take over and lead for officially, you don't know.
Yeah.
It was to me, it was definitely the highlight of this whole month or two we've been kind of going through.
I agree 100%. I mean, to be fair, the standards were ridiculously low. Literally anything could have happened and anybody would have said that it would have been better than the presidential debate. But I felt like if you're looking to know what policies were going to go into effect, depending on each president, that was the place to find it. It's really unfortunate that it took a vice presidential debate to do that. Like, the presidential candidates couldn't even discuss their issues without going back and forth at each other. At least at the vice presidential debate, if the fly wasn't there, I think people would understand a little bit more about the issues going on right now. But it's the closest to what we have at this point. And I agree, like, it really was, if you want to find a highlight in this election within the town halls and debates, I guess this is it.
So if either Mike Pence or Kamala Harris need to step up the role of president, who do you guys think is more qualified?
I'm gonna go ahead with Mike Pence. He's got experience as governor of Indiana. Yes. So I feel like definitely he's more qualified. He's been in a role of vice president already, so he's basically following the footsteps of Donald Trump. So he's got good experience, right? So if something does happen, I think I'm confident in him. I have faith in him.
If we're talking from an experience standpoint, the answer has to be Mike Pence. It just, as Kenny just explained, he's been vice president. He's done this before. He served at almost the highest level you can serve, and that's from an experience standpoint. But from a policy standpoint, I would rather not pick between either one of the two personally. I think they both are fairly flawed candidates in their own right. But so yeah, I'll leave my answer at, in regards to experience, I would definitely go for Pence. But I think Harris is showing that debate night. While I wouldn't necessarily say she destroyed or dominated the night, I think she did look really good. And if Biden does lose, I'd be willing to bet you money that will kind of be one of the moments Harris uses to for a kickstart her next run for president. But that's a lot of ifs, I'm assuming.
I think that what a lot of people aren't thinking about is we've seen Mike Pence lead. We saw him lead the coronavirus task force, and that's not going too swell. I mean, our numbers are going up for, what is this, the third time now? I mean, that was his chance to show us that he's a leader. When you're the vice president, and people have brought this up every single time they criticize Joe Biden, as a vice president, like you're not stepping into the spotlight as much. And Mike Pence literally was in charge of a task force on a global pandemic, and he didn't really step up. I mean, people aren't wearing masks. People are not taking this seriously. There's huge, large gatherings. Colleges have had to shut down. People are getting sick and dying. Hospitals are being overrun. I mean, where did that get us? And it's sad that that's the showing that he made when so many American lives are on the line. But we've seen what he's done, and it wasn't really anything good for our country.
I think a lot of that comes down to personal decisions and choices, like with SUNY Oneonta closing. The students decided to have a party. They probably weren't wearing masks. A lot of that's kind of, vice president can't do anything about it. I mean, everyone knows to wear a mask. It's on the TVs. Where you go, there's signs. You walk around campus here, you can't not look and see a sign saying to wear a mask. A lot of that, it's personal choices. I won't say it's not the right thing to do. You shouldn't be having huge social gatherings right now. Absolutely not. But a lot of, you can't control every person. And, as much as you can pass laws, you can make, penalties and stuff for not social distancing. But at the end of the day, people are going to have a party. They're going to have a party in the time that, it's broken up or whatever. It's usually too late.
Play devil's advocate, and I do agree that ultimately a lot of this stuff does come down to personal choice, and we can't necessarily blame Pence for people deciding to party. Don't you think that a leader should definitely be someone who, if they're not making the official rules, at least sets forth what's the right way to phrase it? Sets forth the standards in which people of that country follow. And again, I'm just playing devil's advocate here. Don't you think that if maybe Pence was a bit more passionate, or not even passionate, but a bit more strict with reinforcing mask policies, don't you think that maybe people would follow it a bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I would have preferred to see mask worn at some of the recent big events going on, in politics. I would have preferred to see him on for sure. That is definitely a big point. I think if they were wearing masks, it would set a good example. But you can't control every single thing. If college students are going to have a party, they're not going to wear masks, then that's on them. You only can do so much. Yeah, I definitely would have liked to see masks worn at a couple of big political events. But
I think a really big part of that, though, is people say wear a mask on TV, but it's commercial, wear a mask on TV. Next on the news, President Donald Trump hosted a big rally and no one's social distancing and he's not wearing a mask and there's people in the audience not wearing a mask. What type of precedent are we setting then? There were weeks in the White House where they were doing press conferences. People were pushed in there together and people were not wearing masks. What does that say? All right, guys, let's be safe, but we're not going to wear masks. What does that say? I mean, even President Trump on Twitter, some of the things he's put on there, he spread false information. Twitter has had to take down some of his tweets because they spread false information about a pandemic. I mean, how much can we really say about that? How much can we really do about that other than, it's true, it is up to personal preference. It's sad that some people don't understand how important this is. But at the same time, I mean, if you are a staunch supporter of this administration and then you go on, you see your president and vice president not wearing a mask, you're thinking to yourself, why should I wear a mask? If the president of the United States doesn't think it's important, why should I think it's important?
And speaking about policy, you guys mentioned how you wish that the debates had more policy-oriented discussions included. What do you guys think of how Trump and Biden answered questions about healthcare? For example, if Trump wants to repeal the Affordable Care Act and calls it a disaster, and is against Medicare for all, while Biden wants some type of public medicine, public healthcare. So how do you think they approached issues like healthcare, issues like race, or even climate change?
I think a lot of it, I like to do myself, is cut the emotion away from the debates. A lot of you hear from the candidates is emotion, especially I think, unfortunately, Democrats do that a lot, Cut the emotion away and listen to what they're actually saying. And you hear like Biden, he didn't say too much. Even I think Medicare for all would be a disaster, and the Affordable Care Act is a disaster. Health insurance premiums are up through the roof. I don't know really that many people who actually got health care from it. And I think the best way is you let it go into the private system, and there's reforms within the private system. Protection when people with pre-existing conditions. That's incredibly important. I know Trump has agreed to that we would keep that in there in the provisions when we're reformatting the healthcare. But same thing too, like one of the big problems is when you give Medicare for all is the emergency room becomes people's primary doctor. They get a cold, they go to the emergency room. Then you end up with wait lines. Emergency room is incredibly expensive. So you have to do it the right way. I think private health insurance is probably the best way to go. Same point too, you look at your age group, what type of coverage you need. Myself is 20 years old, relatively healthy, no big medical conditions. Then I don't need huge coverage. I need coverage for if I'm in an accident or something happens, or maybe I'm diagnosed with something really bad. So I'm okay with having a high copay right now. But if you're over the age of 75, likely having a lot of medical problems and stuff, you're starting to get diagnosed with things. So then you do need something with a lower premium that you can afford and healthcare you need. So I think that's why the private market is best for that, because you can choose the plan you want. The big things too, no one's dying because they don't have healthcare. That's a big thing. People think, oh, they can't afford it, so they can't go to the doctor. I'm like, no, they have to treat you no matter what. If you get in an accident right now, Stony Brook Hospital doesn't care whether or not you have health care. You're going to be treated first.
I think just very quickly, President Trump has said he wanted to repeal that for 4 years. He's been in office since 2017 and it's not done yet. And I think that honestly, when they spoke about policies like that, they deflect it. It was, well, I don't want to do what he's doing, or I want to do different from what they're doing. But like, what do you want to do? Like the personal attacks, it's true. Once you remove the emotion from it, there's not really a lot of substance, and these are very important topics that are going to affect our generation. Just quickly, so you have a chance to talk.
Yeah, real quick, I'll give like a one sentence rundown. I completely agree. I think of American politics as way too much pathos. I think there's definitely a time and a place to appeal to people's hearts, but during these debates where, like we've mentioned multiple times, where there's lives on the line, you can't. I don't want to watch 90 minutes of people making their emotional Twitter video speech. I want the facts, and I feel like I've been let down. Many, I hope, would agree with me that this process has just been one of false promises and attacks on each other.
So before we close off, I really want to quickly talk about where the candidates lie on the issue of climate change. As you guys know, it's one of the most pressing issues of our time. And I'd like to start off with you, Kenny, because I know you're studying sustainability studies. So
yeah, so
imagine you would have some stuff to say about it.
I'm definitely huge in the environment. I've worked in environmental services since I graduated high school, and I'm a sustainability studies major here. So environment's my passion all around. But a big thing is too, a lot of people go towards the Democrats with the Green New Deal and stuff. That doesn't work though. In reality, be honest, under the Trump administration, the air is cleaner than it's ever been. In the past since post-industrialization, the air is extremely clean. Our waters are being cleaned. It's a lot we're doing. The Trump administration is looking in towards new technologies like carbon capture. So, I wish some people were more supportive of it, but I think overall, both parties are starting to unite on the idea of, climate change is here. We have to do something about it. It's what we do and how we're going to implement it. And, definitely too, I think the free market is a big way, we talk a lot about coal, but the capitalist society, coal is a very inefficient way to make electricity. You have to burn a lot of coal to get electricity. Most of the heat goes up the smokestack. So power companies are going towards more technologies like natural gas, where it's still a fossil fuel, but there's a lot less emissions, and you get a lot more power out of natural gas than you would with coal. So a lot of it, we're letting the free market, help combat climate change in that aspect with switching to coal over to other fuel sources. And the EPA, we have very tight standards right now. So
I almost wish I could change my answer in a way of saying economic inequality is the biggest issue facing us, because climate change very well could easily be a 1A, 1B sort of thing. I do find it a bit ironic. I actually think the free market is more responsible for the issues we're facing now than arguably anything else. And I feel like the reason why many companies now are trying to make these changes toward more eco-friendly systems is because it makes them look better. I mean, I find it very ironic that a company like Amazon, for example, which is like been stated to be like one of the most like problematic, harmful companies in the world, you see the commercials now where they're announcing their dedication toward going green per se. But the reality is we're running out of time to make these changes, and false promises and phony commercials aren't going to save us. And we can't just keep banking on colonizing Mars to solve our issues when the reality is, even if something like that ever were to happen, none of us at this table are going to be going to Mars.
I think it sucks that we're at a point now where we can't prevent climate change anymore. We just need to prolong our planet for as long as possible. And it's sad that we're at that point now, especially in our generation when we're all like really trying to do something about it. And as much as it's great that people are like, oh, climate change is a thing, that's something that should have been known already. I mean, we've been saying it for a very long time and nothing's been done about it. I mean, sure, yeah, the Green New Deal has its faults. But if the Green New Deal has its faults, then why isn't another plan being implemented? Why at these debates, because both candidates were like the Green New Deal issues and didn't really state what they wanted their plan to be. Okay, like why should, like, even though my mind is made up, if I were an undecided voter, why, if I cared a lot about climate change, who do you want me to vote for? If you're both telling me, you know, you have your plans, what are your plans?
Okay, so I'd like to close the discussion to talk about how important it is to go out and vote. It goes without saying that voting is both a privilege and a civic duty. I plan on voting on election day at my local poll site. How about you guys?
I plan on voting here. I'm registered to vote on campus, so I will be voting on campus on election day.
I voted on October 24th already, and I cannot state how important it is to vote. It is the only way, at least, it is the most effective non-violent method of creating political change in this country. It is, and while we're talking about the presidential debate election, we cannot ignore local elections. We cannot ignore state level elections. Those policies are the ones that are ultimately going to affect our lives more than Donald Trump or Joe Biden being in the White House at the end of the day. So it is really important to go out and get out there and vote.
I agree. Voting is the most important thing you can do as an average citizen. I myself voted early today. I went to the Riverhead Senior Center and they had early voting, so I voted today already. I don't have to worry about it on election day. But there's 4 ways to vote. You can vote by absentee by mail. You can get an absentee ballot and drop it off at the County Board of Elections office. You can vote early up until Sunday, and then you can vote in person at your local polling place and on election day, November 3rd. So it's, you know, there's no excuse not to vote, I really feel. And that's the best thing you can do. Your vote does count, especially in local elections where candidates only win by 1 or 2%, like the congressional races. They're only winning by a few percentage points. So it's really, really important that you go out and you vote. You know, I think it's the most important thing you can do as a citizen.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining the Statesman Opinions Table Talk. It really meant having you guys here, and it was really enjoyable. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Really enjoyed this.
Good luck,
Thank
America.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good luck, America.
Yeah.
I'm Cindy Mazaku.
And I'm Fanny Frankel.
And thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Cindy and Franny. In Congressional District 1, Zeldin is now leading by 50,000 votes. In Suffolk County, Trump has received 40,000 more votes than Biden.
And the West Coast polling sites are coming to a close. The only states with voters still coming in are Alaska and Hawaii, which will close after this program ends.
So let's check back with Alec and see what's happening on Twitter. Alec?
Hi, how are you?
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good, and I gotta be honest, not much is happening on Twitter. Trump hasn't tweeted in 4 hours.
That's a surprise.
That's a surprise. That's a surprise to me.
You'd expect for Twitter to be like popping. That's crazy.
I know. He's quite tame tonight, but the Trump campaign, the Trump War Room Twitter account, they've been posting graphics for each victory that he's received, including a victory in Florida, which right now the New York Times and the Associated Press are not ruling Florida right now. So that's been a little bit conflicting, but they've been relying on a nonpartisan polling organization to make that decision and to post that on social media.
Talk to me about the Biden camp. How's all that going down on Twitter?
Well, not much. I mean, he hasn't really tweeted much. He had the string of tweets about staying on the line. That's of course referring to after the polling places close. If you stay on the line, of course you can vote. They'll still let you in. But other than that, nothing really on the Biden camp. Kamala Harris hasn't tweeted at all. Mike Pence hasn't tweeted at all. It's
shocking.
It is.
That's
Yeah.
really shocking, but we'll see how it goes. Let's hope that,
Do you know what's trending right now?
What's trending right now? I might be a little biased for the Twitter algorithm because they always take my opinions, but of course, election day is trending. There's an article on Vox saying how Biden or Trump could get the 270 electoral votes, obviously, that they need to win the election. I saw an article on Reuters that says that's about broken relationships because of the election and political affiliations, and that's an interesting article that I read that was trending on Twitter.
I'm really shocked at how quiet Twitter has been.
Yeah.
I expected it to be so much more. I expected it to be like a war ground, like so many people to be like a discussion of ideas and topics, just how the country has been.
Yeah, and also Bernie is trending. Obviously referring to Bernie Sanders, the independent senator from Vermont, and it's kind of I'm seeing a lot of memes here. I'm seeing a picture of the United States of America painted blue and Bernie Sanders screaming in front of it. I'm mainly seeing memes.
Okay.
But I feel like it's great to have voters be able to interact and actually have some fun during an election that might be very stressful for a lot of people. People put a lot. Yeah, people put a lot of stake in this, and a lot of it's just always on people's minds. So it's good to see people that have fun and during election time on Twitter as well. Just one thing for the an update on the Zeldin Goroff race. Goroff actually tweeted a video of herself about an hour ago, thanking polling workers and thanking her voters for coming out and everybody for coming out for the election. Zeldin, he tweeted earlier today a picture of himself and his wife and his twin daughters going to the polls and voting. But other than that, quiet on Goroff and Zeldin as well.
At least you were able to tell that like the general mood is high. Everyone is hoping that their candidate will win, and you can tell that people are participating, which is the most important part of this election.
Yeah. Well, not everybody is so happy. There is now a discussion trending about moving to Canada.
Oh, okay.
Yes, that is also trending. And something's trending called Emotional Support Canadian.
Okay.
I see the headline on Twitter says some Canadians are volunteering to be emotional supports for their American neighbors as projected results of the 2020 presidential election start to come in.
Oh my gosh. Well, let's hope we can all stick together and be each other's
De-stress.
Yep. Be each other's neighbor and be each other's support system.
Right.
Well,
to see like how Twitter will be tomorrow morning.
Yes.
Yeah, well, not all the votes are counted, and so people worrying about the projected results, and maybe in a few days from now we'll get in absentee ballots. It'll be mail-in ballots that might shift the result, especially in close states like Texas and like Florida, which are historically close states, especially Florida, obviously with the history of the 2000 election that went to the Supreme Court.
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Alex, so much for keeping us updated on what's happening on Twitter. I mean, we expected it to be so much more active, but,
Right.
But
I expected the same thing.
I also think it's because this election, I think a lot of people are taking it very, very seriously, and it's going on during a pandemic. So I think that has a lot to do with it as well.
100%. Thanks again, Alex.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Now, James Klurfeld is a former Newsday White House reporter and has covered many, many presidential campaigns. He is also a Stony Brook University journalism professor, and he spoke with reporter Cindy Mazaku about the impact of the press's coverage on this year's election.
So this is Cindy Mazaku, the opinions editor at the Statesman, and today I'll be interviewing James Klurfeld, a visiting professor at Stony Brook University's School of Journalism. I actually had the opportunity to take two of Professor Klurfeld's classes last year, one being opinions and commentary, and the other being beat reporting. To start, I'm going to give a brief introduction about Professor Klurfeld's career in journalism. Klurfeld started working at Newsday as a local reporter in 1968. He moved his way up as the Albany bureau chief, covering national security issues in Washington, and was then appointed editor for the editorial pages. Altogether, he has worked at Newsday for 40 years. This semester, Professor Klurfeld is teaching press and the presidency. So before we start the interview, I'd like to thank you for joining me today.
Happy to do it.
We are going to talk about your experience in reporting on politics over the years, the impacts the press has on presidential campaigns and public opinion, and of course, this year's election. So to start, my first question is, can you tell me about your experience covering politics in Washington, and in what ways has political reporting changed since then?
Well, I think it's changed quite dramatically. I was there for Jimmy Carter's campaign when he came out of Plains, Georgia, and then I covered part of the Reagan years. So I was in Washington for about 10 years, but I also covered presidential campaigns in the 60, 64 through 88, actually. And it changed significantly with the advent of the internet and social media. It used to be that the major way a candidate could communicate with the public was through the media. It was either that or his advertising. And in what they call free media, which is when they put on events, give speeches, but they still had to go through us to do it most of the time, with the exception of the convention or a debate when they could speak directly to the public. Now they don't need the press flying with them. They just go right over your head and tweet or go on social media, and they have so many more outlets.
Yeah, though the age of social media has brought quicker access to information at any given time, it has also brought a lot of challenges for journalists who are doing their job while facing the spread of misinformation and the public's rising distrust for the media. This is especially true when it comes to presidential elections, where news consumers are more likely to follow media outlets that affirm their political views, even if the information is factually incorrect. So to move on to the second question, what values does opinion journalism bring to people, and how have they changed in recent years as fact and opinion become blurred in the media?
Well, I think opinion journalism has the same value as reporting journalism. It's just opinion is using modality of expressing a point of view, but it also has to meet the standards of general reporting. It has to be true. It has to be based on facts. And the advantage of opinion, which I got into after I left Washington when I ran the editorial page in Newsday, was you can explain things in more depth and subtly through opinion.
So how does this year's presidential election compare to others, especially in regards to how candidates are being represented?
We've never had a candidate like Trump. He is just over the top in his treatment of the press, calling the press the enemy. And he uses the press very well. He's an entertainer. And there was a feeling in 2016, the press was taken in by him and gave him a lot more attention than they gave to Hillary Clinton. The question is whether they're doing a better job now. And the question has come up, especially since there were allegations made in the New York Post by Rudy Giuliani, of all people, and Bannon, who's indicted now. So the sources are questionable, but the Post is accusing Biden and his son of having illegal or unethical relationships with big money people in Russia, Ukraine, and China. And the question is, how do we handle that? Trump will say anything, or his people will say anything. The Post, which is owned by Rupert Murdoch, who also owns Fox News, they went with the front page story on it, but they couldn't get anybody to put a byline on it. They put a staffer who didn't really work on the story, her byline. And there's a lot of information that wasn't verified. But the question we face is, if we ignore everything they're saying, isn't that a form of censorship? And shouldn't we lay it all out for people to take a look at both sides? And with the light of day, the sunlight shining on it, people will see the difference. But that, some people think that's naive. And there's pressure from the left to control what the candidate is going to be, what the media should be allowed to say.
So as I'm sure you know, the influence of the media can have the power to shape the outcome of an election. So what are some responsibilities, as you touched on before, that you feel journalists need to hold themselves accountable to when covering election news?
Well, I've felt for a long time that newspaper reporting, television reporting has been too oriented towards the horse race aspect of the campaign, who's ahead and who's behind. I think we make very poor use of polling, because I think polling has inherent flaws. We don't point out that there's usually a 4 to 5% variation in the poll, which could be either 4 more or 4 or less. And the polls are as much an art as a science. You have to figure out, you have to anticipate who's on the panel, who's going to vote. And if you don't have the right groupings of voters, you're going to be off. So that in 2016, many of the pollsters missed the white working class enchantment with Donald Trump.
So to move on to your opinions about this year's election, so what are your thoughts on the presidential debates that have happened these past few weeks?
Well, I thought the first one was an abomination. The second one was much better. You can see them talking about issues a little bit. You want to talk about the horse race sometimes, but you want to also get into the issues in some depth. You're talking about healthcare, and the one thing they didn't talk about, for instance, is if you don't have everybody in the system, the individual mandate, which Trump says is the best thing he did, he got rid of the individual mandate. But if you just wind up with older, sicker people, you're not going to be able to pay for it. You need young, healthy people paying into it. It's just a basic insurance scheme. Young, healthy people pay into it, and they don't use the system as much until they reach older age. So nobody was dealing with the heart of the issue.
So this leads me to my next question. What are a few of the candidates' policies that stood out to you, and how has the media covered them? Are the candidates' claims being thoroughly fact-checked by members of the press?
I think this fellow, this is in Ken Dale on CNN, does a terrific job of fact-checking and then articulating what they haven't done. And you see a lot of fact-checking. I think the problem is that Trump lies so much that we become inured to it. It's just, we're not out, our sense of outrage is dulled by the avalanche of falsehoods that he tells.
And to go back to my first question, what are some issues that you felt the candidates should have elaborated on during the debates?
Well, I think that how to pay for healthcare was one. I think the trade with China was another. One of the first things that Trump did when he became president was take the United States out of the Pacific Trade Agreement, which was an excellent way of competing with China and giving the United States a role. Nuclear weapons control has been eroded under the current administration, and that's worthwhile talking about for sure. They did talk about the Green New Deal, but Biden was put on the defensive about it, and I think he needed more explanation, extrapolation on how you can do that without ruining the economy. And then we're in the middle of the pandemic, and Biden was not specific on what he was going to do, although he said he's going to listen to the scientists. And we know that Trump is not.
When do you think the candidates express certain views to align with their political agenda or their party's agenda?
Well, the interesting thing is the Republican Party doesn't have a platform this year. That's stunning. Now, the platform was always watered down to bring in as many people as possible, have a broad coalition in either party. But it still made them stand for something. And without a platform, Trump is running on a cult of personality. Whereas the Democrats had to grapple with the fact that the left of the party is not happy with the centrists, which included Biden. And the fear is that he'll be beholden to the left and will be pushed around by them to the left. Although he made the argument, he said, I'm Joe Biden, I won. They have to go where I'm going to go. But there's a significant split in the party. They've come together because Trump is a common enemy.
I was going to ask, do you think that Biden would have won the Democratic nomination, or do you think someone else was a better fit for it?
Well, no one else emerged, which was disappointing. He was, he doesn't offend people, and he has to be a very decent, empathetic person. But my grandson, who's just 17 and won't vote, but he's for the first time gotten interested, was watching the debate. He said, "Why did they nominate Biden? He's not very exciting." So, and if you saw Obama this week talking about Trump giving up on controlling the virus, he was terrific. He was dynamic. He brought the crowds, people in their cars. He brought some excitement and some purpose to it.
So my last question is, would you like to share your opinion on who you think will win the election?
Well, I'm cautiously thinking that Biden will get through it. It's a little scary because in many ways, we're in the same position we were in 2016 with Hillary seeming to be the odds-on favorite. But the conditions are somewhat different this time. Trump is an incumbent defending his record, and he's the issue. And the pandemic is the issue. And Biden doesn't alienate people the way Senator Clinton did. So I think all things being equal, I think Biden should prevail, but we could wind up with very close results, and then we'll not know the winner for days or even weeks. It could get tied up in the courts to go to the Supreme Court or go to the House of Representatives.
Okay, is there anything you'd like to leave off with?
Well, it's just been a fascinating campaign to watch. And to your first point about how's it changed for reporters, it's a lot less important to be traveling with the candidate now. It used to be when I was doing it, you traveled with the candidate and his or her top aides, and you got to know them, and they had to work for you. I spent the summer in Plains, Georgia, and it helped me when I went to Washington. I went to Washington right after the campaign, and I knew people in the White House. And I think we're in two different camps now, and we don't mingle.
During what time were you working at Washington?
I was there from 1970, summer of 76, I covered the Carter campaign, till about 1986, when I came back to run the editorial page.
I can imagine a lot has changed since then.
Yes, it's changed a lot.
All right, Professor Klurfeld, thank you so much for joining me today. It was a pleasure talking with you about this year's election.
Always good to see you.
Have a good one.
Thanks, Cindy. In a turn of events, the Georgia Senate special election is projected to go to a runoff. Also, Bloomberg News reported that Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania will not be decided tonight.
Thank you so much once again to everyone that helped us make our first ever live election coverage possible tonight. Thank you again to SBUTV, all of our election live stream volunteers, the Statesman editorial board, and all of our panelists and interviewees, and Phil Altier. Also, thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in to our election coverage.
Thank you. And we are not 100% certain when the results will be confirmed, but as of right now, Zeldin is in the lead for the local race and Biden in the presidential election. Also, remember to take a step back from the news every now and then. Find ways to de-stress and make your mental health a priority.
Thank you all again for joining us tonight. We hope you have a great night. For The Statesman, I'm Melissa Azofefa.
And I'm Maya Brown. Stay safe.
Good night.